News programme with a difference. It's fun.
It's true.
You're not wrong. No one will be cancelled.
Lovely. Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Neil Oliver, every Sunday night at 6 p.m. on GB News. And if an hour is not nearly enough for you, go to gbnews.com for special extended episodes online every Friday at 9 p.m, where we can truly get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on. GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry, Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking,
this is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
down to earth,
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
and most importantly, honest,
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get the book thrown at them.
then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
A very, very good afternoon to you. It's 3 p.m. and welcome to the Martin Daubney Show on GB News, broadcasting live from the heart of Westminster, all across the UK. On today's show, the 17-year-old charged with murdering 3 young girls in Southport on Monday has finally been named. Axel Radukuba Nana appeared at Liverpool Crown Court this morning and was remanded into custody. And locals in Aldershot were left stunned last night after a peaceful protest at a hotel for asylum seekers drew a police response befitting of a full-blown riot, with a helicopter, police dogs and multiple riot vans deployed. I'll speak to one of the protesters' organisers who believes heavy-handed policing is fanning the flames of civil unrest. And later this hour, I'll cross live to Scotland, where there's new rules on XL buddy dogs, which are suspected of having killed more than 20 dogs in the UK in the past 3 years. And that's all coming up in your next hour. Welcome to the show. Pleasure to have your company now. After the news, I want to talk you through a dramatic moment last night where I was handcuffed in Parliament Square simply for reporting on the protest there, simply for doing my job. Get involved with all the usual ways, gbnews.com/your say. But now let's have your news headlines. It's Sophia Wensler.
Martin, thank you. Good afternoon from the GB newsroom. It's just gone 3 o'clock. Your top story this hour. A 17-year-old boy accused of murdering 3 young girls in Southport has been named as Axel Rudakabana. 3 children, 7-year-old Elsie Stankoom, Alice Aguiar, who was 9, and 6-year-old BB King, were killed during the attack at a holiday club. He was named in court this morning after a judge lifted reporting restrictions and was remanded in youth detention. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister will deliver a speech outside Downing Street later after 2 nights of violence following Monday's attack in Southport. Angry crowds took to the streets of Manchester, Hartlepool and London, with some declaring their support for Tommy Robinson, saying, "We want our country back." It's after social media posts falsely claimed the attacker was a Muslim asylum seeker who'd crossed the channel in a small boat. Cars were set on fire in Hartlepool, while flares and bottles were thrown at a statue of Winston Churchill in London's Parliament Square. More than 100 people were arrested in the capital, while Cleveland police made 8 arrests, with more expected. In other news, Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich is being released from a Russian prison as part of an exchange. These are live pictures of the airport in Ankara in Turkey, where the exchange is taking place. Former US Marine Paul Whelan is also being freed as part of the major multi-country deal. Both he and Mr Gershkovich were accused of espionage, which they both deny. Britain is involved in the internationally brokered deal, which is believed to involve 26 prisoners, making it the largest since the Cold War. The Culture Secretary will meet the head of the BBC today after it emerged Hugh Edwards continued to be employed even after he was arrested on suspicion of serious offences. It comes after it was revealed that the former news presenter was arrested in November but continued to be employed until April. In a statement, the BBC said that at the time no charges had been brought against Mr Edwards, and it was also aware of significant risk to his health. He pleaded guilty yesterday to charges related to receiving indecent images of children during an online chat. Former BBC executive Roger Bolton told us that many questions remain.
It's absolutely clear that BBC News and all the editors involved did not know until this week that Hugh Edwards had been charged, let alone what he'd been charged with. And clearly, if you've watched all the reporting and reading the website of the BBC News has been reporting this top item, not hiding anything. However, the big questions remain about, we now know that the BBC executives were told in confidence that Hugh Edwards had been arrested. When did they know he was charged? And the big question over all of this is, why did they continue to pay him so much money?
Now, the Bank of England has cut its base interest rate to 5%, marking the first reduction since March 2020. The rate had been held at 5.25% since August last year, which was the highest level since 2008. It comes as new data suggests the cost of living crisis is easing, thanks to inflation cooling off. GPs in England have voted to limit the number of appointments available in their first collective action since 1964. NHS England says it could cause significant disruption across the whole health service. The British Medical Association says it's taking action over what it describes as a lack of funding for GPs. It comes despite the Health Secretary warning that while the previous government failed to recruit enough doctors, reducing services would only punish patients. Tensions are rising in the Middle East as Iran orders retaliatory strikes on Israel following the death of a top Hamas leader. Thousands turned out for the funeral of Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran, who was the terror group's most senior political chief. He was killed this week by a bomb that was reportedly smuggled into the guest house in an upscale part of the Iranian capital 2 months ago. Both Britain's Foreign and Defence Secretaries are in Qatar for talks aimed at quelling the rising tensions. And 7 Just Stop Oil protesters have been arrested after blocking the passenger search area at Heathrow's Terminal 5. The group was seen holding signs saying "Oil kills" and "Sign the treaty" in front of the barriers to the area for departing passengers. The airport says disruption was minimal and its terminal continued to operate normally. It comes after a protest on Tuesday that saw 2 activists arrested for spattering orange paint throughout the terminal. Those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Sophia Wensler, more in half an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to news alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thank you, Sophia. Now, welcome to the show, and there's a lot to talk about between now and 6 o'clock. But before we start, I'd like to spend a few moments telling you what's happened to me last night. Pictures on your screen show I was handcuffed at the Cenotaph last night simply for doing my job as a reporter for GB News. I was filming the protest that had amassed there, a very, very heavy police presence, police in full riot gear. As you can see, I was filming several arrests on the ground in that area, and with no warning, a WPC put the handcuffs on me. I couldn't believe it. To be fair, when I explained that I was a journalist and I was recognised by 1 or 2 of the coppers, they quickly released me and I was on my way. If I hadn't been known to them, I'm sure I would have been one of the over 100 arrest figures that came out last night. Now, the style of policing last night was very, very different to the style of policing I've seen at other protests. I go to lots of these protests because they're on my way home from the GB News studio. I walk through them. You can see here the police are kettling people along a wall there, and bottles being thrown, liquids being thrown, and it gets a bit fruity. There were arrests, but they were very, very heavily policing that. Now, back in February, I covered another protest. Pictures on your screen now. There was a projector in the same place at Parliament Square, projecting from where I was there, pointing onto Big Ben, projecting messages from the river to the sea, disgusting images that were projected around the world. I was imploring police officers there on that day to make an intervention at least, or an arrest, to clamp down on this. That didn't happen. Later on, when I was asking them to point out people wearing face masks, I said, arrest those people, that's against the law. I was egged by protesters and they ran off and no arrests were made. Very, very different policing last night. And I put it to you, is this two-tiered policing fanning the tinderbox of civil unrest in Britain? Well, at 4 o'clock today, Sir Keir Starmer is having an emergency meeting on national policing, and we face a decision, we face a junction. I hope he does the right thing, because at the moment, many, many people feel that policing in Britain is broken. It simply isn't working. We'll have that press conference, that full thing, at 4 p.m. on the show. Now, moving on, the 17-year-old male charged with the murder of the 3 girls killed in Southport has been named. Axel Rudakabana appeared at Liverpool Crown Court this morning, and the court heard that he will turn 18 next week. Elsie Dot, Stankham, Alice Aguiar and BB King died after a mass stabbing at a dance session on Hart Street in Southport on Monday. And the teenager has also been charged with 10 counts of attempted murder and also the possession of a bladed article. Well, joining me now is Mike Prendergast. He's the Conservative councillor for Southport. Mike, welcome to the show. Can I first, again, just offer my condolences to the horrendous grief that Southport must be going through. We've covered this story on GB News since the start, an incredibly emotional story. It's very, very much moved our viewers, and we were also shocked by some of the response from the community. We didn't see a second night of unrest last night, mercifully, but can you give us an indication, Mike, of the mood in the town, especially now that the young man, the boy, has now been named?
Well, the town's still grieving, really. I want to express my condolences to the family for what happened, for the awful, awful tragedy that's befallen them. And in terms of the response from the emergency services, I want to thank them for the work they've done, not only responding to the incident on Monday when they ran towards what was going on to try to help people, to try and save people, but also to respond to what went on later on as well, when we saw those terrible scenes with the violence that happened on Tuesday night. So the town, as a town, is still grieving. What we're trying to do is all support one another. The town came together after the incidents on Tuesday night. The following morning, there was a huge clear-up operation where members of the community came out to support one another, to clean up, to rebuild, to help people. And really, as a town, like I say, we're still grieving, really. And of course, that there are families who have lost children. There are children still in hospital as well, who are still in a critical condition. And we all just hope for the best for them.
And Mike, these kinds of events are simply unimaginable for anybody to comprehend. It's going to take a long time for the community to get over what is a very, very long shadow. But the good news is this young man has been apprehended quickly. He's been detained. He's now been charged. So as we move towards getting justice, there is hope of the community coming back together. Can I ask you about how the community has rallied around the events? We're seeing pictures on our screen of the vigil now and then of the ensuing trouble. Do you feel that somehow the hardships, the aftermath, the vigil and then the protest can be a much-needed catalyst to try and pull the community back together?
Well, I hope that what the pictures you're seeing there of the vigil, I hope that's what your viewers take from Southport, really, as a response to the tragedy that's happened in the town. The riots that, I mean, I wouldn't describe them as protests. I'd describe them as riots. These were people who travelled to Southport to deliberately cause violence and attack police and cause damage. They came to cause trouble. They weren't protests. They were rioters. And I think we should describe them as such. But the vigil and the support that came afterwards, after we had those riots, that's the true face of Southport. That's the true town that I know, the town that I represent, the town where I act as a councillor. And the community is supporting one another. There's people out there who are helping the families, people out there who are helping clean up the damage from the riots. And as a community and as a town, we've come together to try to support one another. And I'm sure we'll continue to do so.
Mike, can I ask you about a story, a much-needed, heartwarming story during all of this darkness, and that's of the Swifties for Southport story. That a huge sum of money has now been raised by people from all around the world. £300,000, I believe, is the latest tally. An astonishing thing. And again, Mike, do these small crumbs of comfort just offer you, I think it offers our viewers, offers me, offers the nation, some restored faith in human nature?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's obviously the campaign the campaign that you've referred to there, but there are other fundraising activities where people are raising funds for the families. And I think that those kind of things, they show people's true nature, really, and what people really feel. And that the vast majority of people, when something tragic like this happens, they want to help. They want to do something to help, whether that's to donate to a GoFundMe type page to try to raise money to support people, or to actively get involved when trying to clear up after we had the riots earlier in the week. People just want to do something to help. And that is an example of that, really. And that is what the vast majority of people feel, I think.
Yeah, I believe now the latest figure is £335,000, an astonishing amount. Thank you very much for joining us, Mike Prendergast, Conservative Councillor for Southport during these difficult times. Thank you. I appreciate your time. Now, joining us now live from Liverpool Crown Court is GB News' national reporter Charlie Peters. Charlie, so finally the suspect in this case has been named. The public interest in the end, Charlie Peters, simply too great for that name to be put off. Tell us the picture.
Well, Martin, earlier today, Axel Rudakabana attended 2 hearings. The first was in the youth court, where he was silent, where the charges were read out before him. 3 counts of murder for those 3 children, 10 counts of attempted murder, 2 adults, Leanne Lucas and John Hayes, the other 8 children who can't be named legally at this stage, and then also possession of a bladed article, understood to be a kitchen knife that was curved. Having left that proceedings with his face covered by his tracksuit top and remaining silent throughout, occasionally rocking in the dock, he was then brought into the Crown Court for a second hearing, where again he was addressed but remained silent, and the issue of his anonymity order and what would happen to him for bail and dealing with being kept in remand was also addressed. Now, Mr. Justice Mannery, the judge in this case, had some competing perspectives to deal with.
Charlie Peters there. And of course, we'll have much more on that story throughout the show. The 17-year-old was named after huge public pressure. And of course, there'll be a massive conversation about the story of should that happen sooner. There was all the speculation that filled that vacuum. And did that help to fuel the civil unrest? Now, the BBC's admitted it knew that Hugh Edwards had been arrested on suspicion of serious offences in November. But it continued employing him and paying him until April. One big question, why? How on earth did that happen? And can we get that money back? I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Neil Oliver, every Sunday night at 6 p.m. on GB News. And if an hour is not nearly enough for you, go to gbnews.com for special extended episodes online every Friday at 9 p.m, where we can truly get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on. GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. This is GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
You'll relate to this one. We've all been there, haven't we? Tensions high in the car as you head off on the latest adventure or holiday during the summer break.
Now, with the average family set to spend about 3.5 hours a week together in the car driving on the roads during the holidays, new research has shown that our relationships could be tested to the limit.
Yes, figures show that 21% are having arguments for simple things like the driver going the wrong way, which we were saying is not actually very simple. That's very serious.
I was going to say that. I'm surprised it's just 21%. Yeah. So if I was going the wrong way down the road,
you'd know about
it. You'd hear from me.
A further 20% squabbling over how their partner drives, yes, and 25% admitting to being more prone to rowing when their kids are misbehaving. It's a lot to deal with, isn't it?
Fair enough.
Well, we're joined now by dating and relationship coach and author Persia Lawson. Good to see you this morning, Persia. What is it about being in a car that just makes things so tense?
Well, I think it's probably quite obvious, isn't it? It's the fact that we are in a confined space, we can't go anywhere, and it can just really create so much tension and stress, especially if you and your other half or a family member, whoever you're in the car with, are going through a little bit of a tricky time. And if it's really hot outside, that doesn't help either. So inevitably, it creates a lot of irritation and bickering, I would say, from my experience.
And what is it about children? If you add children into the mix, it just makes things very, very difficult, doesn't it?
Well, yeah, because there's a lot of, are we there yet?
Yeah.
Kicking the back seat and just squabbles, kicking the siblings. So adding children into the mix is just going to turn the heat up on that tension.
GB News, the People's Channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/your-say. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff.
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry, Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's 3:20. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News. Later in the show, I'll talk about what could be a rare bit of common sense from Meghan Markle. Apparently, she wishes Prince Harry would stop all of his legal action and, in the words of a former employee of their charitable foundation, live in the moment. Another word salad there from Meghan. Now, there's still plenty of time to enjoy a massive win this summer with your chance to win £30,000 in tax-free cash. And you really could be our next big winner. And here's how.
Celebrate a spectacular summer with your chance to win an incredible £30,000 in tax-free cash in our Great British Giveaway. It's the biggest prize of the year so far, and it's totally tax-free. What would you spend that on? Luxury holidays, a new car, or just put it away for a rainy day? Whatever you do with £30,000 in tax-free cash, make sure you don't miss out on a chance to make it yours. For another chance to win £30,000 in tax-free cash, text cash to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries cost £2 or post your name and number to GB07 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 30th of August. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Now to the growing Hugh Edwards scandal, and the BBC is facing serious questions after it admitted that it knew the presenter had been arrested on suspicion of serious offences in November, but it continued employing him for a further 5 months. Mr Edwards pleaded guilty yesterday to 3 charges of making indecent photographs after he was sent 41 illegal images by a convicted paedophile. The BBC Director General Tim Davie will meet Culture Secretary Lisa Nandy soon. And earlier today, former BBC producer and editor John Mayer spoke to GB News.
This is a homemade crisis. The BBC has brought this on itself. You know, where's Tim Davie getting advice from? He's surrounded by management consultants, editorial consultants. He doesn't have a journalist in a senior position. He doesn't have a flat catcher. Most good BBC DGs have somebody who catches the flag. He doesn't have that. He obviously makes all the decisions himself. I mean, I think today that quite a few people should actually be fired, be put up against the wall and fired. Anybody from the commissioner at BBC Wales who turned down the first person right through to whoever's made the last decisions. You know, it was very simple. The answer: you suspended him once you knew about the charge. You suspended him, put the money into an escrow account, and say, look, if you're found innocent, this is your money. If you're found guilty, it's our money. So instead of which, an awful lot of licence payer money has gone to Hugh Edwards when he was under deep suspicion, and the BBC knew about it. You know, what are they playing about? You know, Tim Davie needs to be kicked around the room by Lisa Nandy today. You know, he has surrounded himself with people who don't seem to know what they're doing. If you saw Newsnight a year ago, you saw that they actually alleged, they said firmly that there were people in the newsroom who he was sending flirtatious messages to. He didn't sue, the BBC didn't deny it. So obviously it's true. But, you know, look, this man is smaller than the BBC. The BBC should just have got rid of him once they knew he was about to be charged. Just let him loose, not you know, let him resign in his own time, not waste an awful lot of licence payers' money. Get rid of him. You know, because this is the BBC. This is not the Hugh Edwards Corporation.
PA. So there we go. There's so much to talk about. So I'm joined in the studio by our political editor, Chris Hope. Chris, welcome to the studio. An astonishing scandal. And basically, it's one that is making a great many GB News viewers ask a very, very simple question. £200,000 after this came to light, after his arrest. Why on earth is the BBC paying him that money, and can licence payers have any method of getting that money back?
Well, let's break that question down, Martin. I think you are basically saying what the GB News viewers and listeners are thinking or saying right now. This individual, Hugh Edwards, was one of the highest paid TV presenters. He was arrested last November for these child pornography allegations at the time. He then was paid by the BBC at the same level until he left the corporation earlier this year. That's £200,000 of licence fee payers' money. Now, the BBC tell me today they couldn't act and sack him on arrest because the charges might have been dropped and he could have gone back to work, because don't forget the other issue was communicating with this individual that the Sun found out about. There was no criminality there, we were told. So the BBC felt in a difficult position. Do they act now and give him the bullet, only for him to come try and get his job back later, then they've got to pay out compensation running maybe into 7 figures, or do they wait until charges happen? And by the time the charges happened, and we knew about them on Monday this week, he was no longer a BBC employee. So they're in a bit of a difficult situation. But you are right, there's no question. There are big questions out there. You heard there from that guest earlier on Good Afternoon Britain. Why on earth was this happening? Why is no one seeing these problems coming?
And a new line has just come in here, Chris, which further complicates the picture. And it's saying here the BBC was told by police not to share details.
That's right.
Of Hugh Edwards' arrest.
A BBC source has texted me right now saying this: the information was given in strict confidence by the police and was not to be shared. So the BBC is saying formally to GB News right now they were told they could not share this by the police. So the questions are now to be answered not just by the police, but by the BBC, forgive me, but the Met Police.
And there's a huge question there about who controls the media. Are the media not allowed to report on their own presenter because the police tell them not to? What kind of situation are we in there?
The BBC, of course, corporately was told it. Now, the BBC News operation, I'm not here to defend the BBC, but there was a glass wall between the two. The two can't communicate. This was as an employer. I mean, setting all this to one side, there's a meeting happening today between Lisa Nandy, the Culture Secretary, and Tim Davie, the DG of the BBC, the Director General. That's a phone call because Lisa Nandy's in France and Tim Davie is somewhere else in the UK in a BBC office. So he's dealing with it there. And this will come up. We'll be hearing later from the government what happens, but they have lost, I think, the Labour government, some of the kind of the threat they can use against the BBC, because the Tory government was looking at maybe replacing the licence fee with a Netflix-style subscription model when the charter's up for renewal. That has been dropped by Sir Keir Starmer. He told us that on the flight to NATO when I was with him for GB News. So whether they take a hard line on the BBC is a big test for Labour as well as the BBC, and now it seems the police.
And the BBC Royal Charter is up for renewal. That falls within this Labour government. Everybody knows that the BBC is more appreciative of the BBC than the Conservatives. And you can talk all we like
Labour
about,
is.
Yeah, Labour. So we'll talk all we like about the political neutrality or not of the media organisation, but we know that Labour Party...
You say that. They do always fall out. Let's not forget the Iraq War inquiry, Chilcot.
That's a long time ago.
But
at present, most people would probably agree that the Labour Party are more pro the BBC's agenda because it fits their politic. Most people would say that. And therefore, any conversation with real fangs about process, about the Charter, isn't going to happen anytime soon in this Labour government.
Well, Labour has defanged, to use your expression, that conversation by saying there's no more threat to the licence fee. So it's a question of now, what should the BBC have done? I would expect, and we'll hear a readout later from the government, probably tonight, there might be some form of inquiry by the BBC, I'm guessing this, but I think this is where it's going, into the processes and policies, how to deal with high-profile employees if they're arrested and not charged. What do? Do you stop paying them on arrest and then wait for a charging decision and then pay it back if they're not charged, or let them go? But I think certainly £200,000 of all our money, if you watch the BBC Live, you pay this licence fee. There's a question of why that money was paid to Hugh Edwards for so long, and they knew what was going on, the BBC, and they were told not to talk about it by the Met.
And do you think it's politically very sensitive for the BBC and for the Labour Party if they're seen not to do much about it, because the net consequence of this could be, Chris, people voting with their wallets, simply saying, I'm not going to pay the licence fee anymore, and therefore that forces that conversation on further.
Well, the BBC have a problem anyway, that many young people just don't watch the BBC Live. They don't watch it. They watch YouTube, they watch it elsewhere, they watch Twitter, TikTok and GB News on YouTube, of course, nowhere near the BBC's output. So there is a problem here they're losing their audience as it gets older, as these young people don't watch it in the same way, and they've got to worry they're going to lose it further if they carry on with this.
All eyes on that meeting later. You think the announcement will be later on this evening?
I'm expecting a readout tonight from the government, but of course I'll be trying to get that as soon as I can for GB News viewers and listeners.
Superb, Chris Hope. Always a pleasure, as ever. Now, there's lots more still to come between now and 4 o'clock, and I'll bring you our full interview with Suella Braverman by this man, Chris Hope, and find out whether or not she's planning to join Reform after pulling out of the race to become the next Tory leader. Could Suella jump into bed with Nigel? But first, here's your latest news headlines with Sophia Wensler.
Martin, thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Sophia Wensler with your headlines at 3:30. A 17-year-old boy accused of murdering 3 young girls in Southport has now been named as Axel Rudabakanu. 3 children, 7-year-old Elsie Dot Stanku, Alice Aguiar, who was 9, and 6-year-old BB King were killed during the attack at a holiday club. He's been remanded in youth detention accommodation after appearing at Liverpool Crown Court this morning. Angry crowds took to the streets of Manchester, Hartlepool and London, with some declaring their support for Tommy Robinson, saying, "We want our country back." It's after social media posts falsely claimed the Southport attack suspect was a Muslim asylum seeker who'd crossed the Channel in a small boat. The Prime Minister will deliver a speech outside Downing Street later after discussing the civil unrest with police chiefs. The BBC says it was told by police not to share details of Hugh Edwards' arrest for offences related to images of child abuse. It comes after it was revealed that the former news presenter was arrested in November but continued to be employed until April. These are live pictures of the airport in Ankara in Turkey, where Wall Street journalist, reporter Evan Gershkovich is reportedly being released from a Russian prison. Former US Marine Paul Whelan is also being freed as part of that major multi-country deal. Both he and Mr. Gershkovich were accused of espionage, which they both deny. The exchange is believed to involve 24 prisoners, making it the largest since the Cold War. The Bank of England has cut base interest rate to 5%, marking the first reduction since March 2020. The rate had been held at 5.25% since August last year, which was the highest level since 2008. And GPs in England have voted to limit the number of appointments available in their first collective action since 1964. The British Medical Association says it's taking action over what it describes as a lack of funding for GPs. Those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Sophia Wensler. More in half an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Cheers Britannia Wine Club proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
And here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2830 and €1.1864. The price of gold is £1,913 and 35 pence per ounce. And the FTSE 100's at 8,348 points.
Cheers Britannia Wine Club proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Thank you, Sophia. Now, if you want to get in touch with us here at GB News, then you know what to do. Simply go to gbnews.com/your say, get your comments in, and I'll make sure to read out the best a little later in the show. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update brought to you from the Met Office. Through this evening, thunderstorms will continue across parts of England. Hail and flooding is a risk with those thunderstorms. And across the northwest, it will turn a bit cloudier and wetter. That's because a weather front is arriving. It'll be a bigger feature as we head into tomorrow, bringing some wet and windy weather to the northwest. But through this evening, the potential for some further torrential downpours spreading into eastern areas of England. That could bring some travel disruption, but they will ease through the night. So for many of us, it will be a dry night, clear skies, but still a fairly muggy and humid one with temperatures in the mid to high teens for many areas. A little bit cooler further north, but certainly milder than it has been here lately. Now, as I said, through Friday, we've got wet and windy weather arriving into the northwest. So first thing on Friday across western areas of Scotland, the Highlands and Western Isles, probably some outbreaks of quite heavy rain. Further east to this, it will be a bright start across parts of Aberdeenshire, also across the Borders region as well, plenty of dry and bright weather. Further south as well, a fairly bright start to the day, particularly across Wales, central areas of England, the southwest as well. But in the southeast, there is a chance of some further heavy downpours through Friday morning. These bring a risk of further thunderstorms as well. Away from that, though, it should be another dry and bright day for many of us. Still feeling very warm in the sunshine across many areas of the UK. But across the north and west, where this wet and windy weather is spreading into parts of Northern Ireland and much of Scotland through Friday afternoon, it will turn a little bit fresher, temperatures dropping down into the teens away from the rest of the UK. Temperatures elsewhere still in the mid to high 20s and still feeling quite humid through Friday daytime. Into Friday evening, this band of rain will continue to push southeastwards through this evening to bring outbreaks of rain to many areas through Saturday, particularly in the southeast. That will clear away to the east for Sunday, but there's further rain arriving into the west later on. Bye-bye.
The latest GB News travel.
Good afternoon, I'm John Vincent. Queues on the M6 northbound in Cheshire. There's a lane closed for a broken down car just after junction 18 for Middlewich. Slow for the M5 northbound in Worcestershire due to an earlier caravan fire between junction 8, the M50 and 7 for Worcester, although all lanes have reopened. The usual slow traffic for the M5 northbound in the West Midlands to join the M6 at junction 8. Estimated travel time around 20 minutes. Queues on the M25 anti-clockwise in Hertfordshire due to an accident between junction 25 Enfield and 24 Potters Bar in the roadworks area. And on the M25 clockwise, it's slow in the roadworks between junction 23 South Mims and 24 Potters Bar. And long delays on the M25 anti-clockwise in Kent due to an earlier accident just before junction 1A, the Dartford Tunnel. And that's the latest traffic and travel news.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Your time is 3:38. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News. Later in the show, I'll have the latest from the Paris Olympics, where Team GB has again been in the medals today. But now, as promised, our big interview with Suella Braverman, and the former Home Secretary has told GB News that she won't be joining Reform UK despite not running for next Tory leader. Now, Mrs Braverman was speaking to GB News' political editor Chris Hope. Here it is.
How did you feel when you announced this week you weren't going to stand to be Tory party leader?
I guess, in one word, sorry. You know, I did have a lot of support from members of the party.
You had 10 members, MPs, to back you?
10 MPs who had, prepared to sign my nomination form to get on the ballot. So I was sorry to them because they, decided to back me. I was sorry to the thousands of Tory members who had written to me in recent weeks urging me to go forward.
Thousands?
For the leadership.
Thousands,
yes, absolutely. But, I have to read the runes. In Parliament. I didn't have the support to proceed. And so, it's better for everybody.
Do you think you got unfairly judged in your time? I mean, you're a very relaxed, friendly person I've met over the years, but that's not the public persona, is it?
Listen, I think it comes with the territory of politics. I'm a conviction politician. I'm someone who I see this role not just as a means to rise up the greasy pole. I do see it as a way to actually try and speak the truth on behalf of the British people, to the British people, for the British people. And sometimes those truths are really difficult to hear in the Westminster bubble, amongst the kind of elites, amongst some of my colleagues. 2 years ago, I was the first cabinet member to publicly call for us to leave the European Convention of Human Rights. I was demonised then. People said I was mad and crazy for saying that. 2 years on, we've got so-called one nation candidates in the leadership contest, like Tom Tugendhat, leading with a pledge to potentially leave the European Convention.
He hasn't gone further than Rishi Sunak. I mean, look at the wording there.
He's done it in very caveated wording. But I thought that was quite telling that someone from the One Nation wing of the Conservative Party would even want to embrace that subject. But I think the fact that he has chosen that subject,
you've changed the weather
something
on that.
to talk about, is a reflection of how we've moved the debate and shifted the Overton window. When I said multiculturalism wasn't working last year, I did so because it was the important thing to describe and observe in our country. Again, none of the members of the cabinet backed me up and I was shunned. But, 6 months on, a lot of people, I think, would agree with that analysis. When I said that the police were being too soft on the pro-Palestinian protesters, I lost my job for it.
That was the opinion piece that appeared in one of the newspapers, the Telegraph.
Yes, it was the right thing to do because the police had to step up and be more robust with, anti-Semitism and racism running rife on our streets. I am someone who I acknowledge that I will try and break new ground by saying some of these things. It doesn't do me any favours and, I put my head above the parapet and I get shot down. But it does make it easier for others to come in afterwards and say the things in a similar way.
You're the pioneer, are you?
Well, I wouldn't say that myself.
Okay.
That's your word. But I mean, and if that's my role...
Yeah.
I will keep fulfilling that role because I think these debates are really important to have. And, if we can start these conversations and then thereafter change policy and direction of our party and therefore our country, then I think that's an important role to be had.
Have you given up on ever leading the party again?
I'm
Come on,
I'm
you
not
and me
gonna put
talking.
myself-
No one's listening to this.
No one's listening, are they? No, I won't put myself forward again. I'm very happy. I've had a go, and I am here to support. I'm passionate about Conservative revival, and you're right. I do come to politics with a bit of heart and soul. It gets me into trouble sometimes, I admit, but I'm trying to speak in an authentic voice that people understand.
But they respond to that. I've seen it at the Tory Party conference. When you speak to them, they love it. They love it.
And I love speaking like that, and I want to, and I do it because I have a deep and profound love of my country and the British people.
But so you won't ever stand again for Tory leadership. Is that because you get one chance really at that? I mean, look at Jeremy Hunt. He's had, I think, 2 or 3 goes, but with declining returns.
Listen, I very much hope the leader we choose stays in post for a very long time. We do tend to chop and change, and I think we've done that with too much frequency in recent years, which is one of the reasons the electorate got fed up with us. Let's have some stability. Let's allow someone to bed in and let their agenda
and work out what it is.
And let's give it a good go. But no, that will be it from me, I think.
And what's next for you? There's talk about reform. Would you ever join reform?
I'm not going to defect to reform, no. And I hope I'm not driven out to reform by my colleagues. Listen, I look at Lee Anderson. Lee Anderson is a good friend of mine, and it's a tragedy that we lost him to reform. He's someone who speaks with an authentic voice that resonates with a lot of people in Britain. And, he's someone who is very brave, incredibly dedicated, and that we lost him, that our Conservative Party could not be the broad church. We talk about our broad church. Well, we weren't broad enough for Lee Anderson. Lee Anderson should be sitting as a Conservative Member of Parliament. In fact, we should have more Conservative Members of Parliament, because reform should not have been the force that it was. And many of our MPs lost because of reform. So we talk about a broad church. We should not be hounding out Conservatives, right-wingers, Eurosceptics, people who want to stand up for our flag and our faith, and as if they are somehow swiveled-eyed loons, which is the term that David Cameron, I think, used many years ago.
Allegedly.
Allegedly.
I'm not sure he ever said he did use that term.
Fair enough, allegedly. Lee Anderson should be a Conservative MP.
Just looking forward to the 2029 election, how many MPs do you think reform could end up with if the Tory party doesn't change course?
I am absolutely confident that reform can do better.
Dozens of MPs?
It's very hard to put a number on it, but, look, they came second in many, many places. That
98 or 90 or so.
Right, that's a high number of seats where they came second. That should alarm the Conservatives. They came second in a lot of Labour-held seats now, so that they are eating into the Labour vote. They took more of the under 30 vote than we did. So for young people are voting more for reform than they are for the Conservatives. These facts alone should, seriously alarm any Conservative leader and all Conservative MPs. I'm just concerned that there's still a level of complacency and,
is it time to bring Nigel Farage into the party, into your party?
Listen, I don't know what form it would take, but then the fact is that there is not enough room in British politics for two Conservative parties. Reform and the Conservatives cannot coexist in the way that they are. We will have no chance of winning the next general election as long as reform is a viable alternative.
So they've got to merge the two parties.
I wouldn't necessarily say that. As I say, I don't know what form it should take, but we cannot even consider ourselves as a viable government in waiting as long as reform is a force to be reckoned with.
Well, Chris O, an excellent interview there with Suella Braverman. She's very open, very gregarious, but here's what leapt out to me. Reform and the Tories cannot coexist. They're an existential threat. But the key line was, I hope I'm not driven out. Seems to suggest that maybe she could be driven out, and therefore she would go to reform.
Suella Braverman said at the weekend, Martin, she won't stand to be Tory leader. She had enough support, the 10 MPs required to back her. She's using this, and this is the only interview she's giving, by the way, since that announcement. She's making very clear to the next leader, You have to go after Reform UK's 4 million votes. Don't go into the middle ground. Don't be squeezed by Labour and Lib Dems. She is saying if you go into the middle ground, I think she's saying you might lose my support. It's very clear to me a challenge to the future leader of the Labour Party, of the Tory Party. Go after the Reform votes. Go after Nigel Farage. You've got to deal with that threat to win back power in 2029.
Excellent interview, as ever. Chris Hope there on Chopper's podcast with Suella Braverman, and she was speaking to Apple's editor Chris Hope, of course. Excellent stuff. Now, from today, there are strict new rules on owning XL buddy dogs in Scotland. I'm going to cross live to Ayrshire to find out what the new rules mean. Even I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, British News Channel.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Tom, dying to talk to you about this. Transport for London, right? They run the buses and tubes and things in London. And they've got £2.5 million. £2.5 million, which they're going to spend on what?
Diversity training. I dare say they've probably got plenty of it already.
But let me tell you something. I sit on a board of a company and I was diversity trained recently.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Oh, really?
And I must admit...
What was that like?
Well, I tell you, it was like stating the bleeding obvious.
Yeah.
Right? So you sit there and you say, well, why would I do that? Or why would I treat someone like that? I wouldn't do that in the first place. I don't need to be trained in this. And you just sat there for 6 hours while people told you the obvious. But what do you think of spending that amount of money for Transport for London?
It's crazy, because on the one hand, do we need this diversity training? The TfL is an incredibly diverse workforce already. The idea that there are barriers to entry there doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. Also, as you say, these things are commonsensical, really. And to the point, sometimes they can become problematic because they're not just saying, you know, be open and tolerant of people and so on. It's actually preaching a more kind of divisive sort of rhetoric to people, which can be a big problem in the
get your
workplace.
diversity training from your boss or somebody, don't you? Somebody pulls you up and says, you don't talk to people like that. This is how you talk to them. That's it. Done.
It should be that
spend
simple.
6 hours in front of...
And I know that in the grand scheme of things, £2.5 million is kind of money down the back of the sofa. But at the same time, my local tube station just closes early on random nights of the week because of the fact that they haven't got enough staff.
4 years ago, there were 655 people at City Hall earning over £100,000 a year. People might argue that's 655 too many. There are 1,100 now. 4 years later.
1,100?
Actually, 1,142 to be precise.
The People's Channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the arguments. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back, 3:51. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News. Now at around 4 o'clock, about 10 minutes' time, we'll hear from Sir Keir Starmer, who's been meeting Britain's top coppers after this week's violent protest. What will we hear from him? All eyes on 4 o'clock. Now, new rules and safeguards over the ownership of XL buddy dogs have come into effect today in Scotland. The new rules will be similar to those introduced in England in December, which made it illegal to breed, sell, advertise, rehome or abandon an XL buddy dog. And GB News' Scotland reporter Tony Maguire is in Ayrshire. Tony, welcome to the show. So new laws in Scotland. Talk us through them and what the impact will be north of the border.
Yeah, good afternoon, Martin. I will say that a second ago I was surrounded by dogs and this shot made perfect sense, and now it just looks like I'm a little too relaxed at the end of my shift. But alas, today was the deadline last night for XL Bully owners to get that exemption certification, and certainly anyone who doesn't have, who is caught by the police, well, they could face a hefty £5,000 fine as well as risk losing their dogs. So just to kind of give a brief recap of these rules which have come in later than England and in Wales. These dogs now have to be microchipped and neutered, as well as being muzzled when outside. And owners had to pay that £92 to get that certification in order to be allowed to keep their dogs. Now, over the last 6 months, really since we've seen that legislation first roll out in England, we have seen essentially caravans of cars and vans bringing XL Bully dogs up to Scotland. Now, this is, of course, in the wake of all those horrific attacks, many of which have been recorded by members of the public and then shared onto social media. And indeed, speaking to the owner here today at Islay Dog Rescue, it's becoming a very huge problem.
The right living conditions, some of them are big softies, and some of them are big softies. We've had ones in here that were absolutely wonderful, really lovely, loving dogs. However, we've also had a few, 3 or 4 spring to mind immediately, that were lovely dogs until they weren't. And it was literally like one day a switch flicked, and all 4 of these dogs ended up being euthanised, either with us, 2 with us, and 2 in homes. All the big operators in the dog rescue industry, the Dogs Trust, Battersea, the RSPCA, the SSPCA, all of them are against this legislation. So you have to ask yourself, why do the government continue to go with it? Why do the government not sit down with these organisations and ask them to formulate a plan? That's their business, their expertise, they know what they're doing.
Now, some breeders are already trying to get round these new rules by breeding what they're calling pocket bullies in the hope that they're not going to be genetically similar and fall within the same guidelines. However, that's not much comfort to all those victims whose lives have been changed forever.
Now, in a few minutes, we'll hear live from Sir Keir Starmer, who'll be talking about this week's riots following the killings of 3 young girls in Southport. Policing is at a huge junction. That's coming up in a few moments. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel, and now's your weather with Annie Shuttleworth.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update brought to you from the Met Office. Through this evening, thunderstorms will continue across parts of England. Hail and flooding is a risk with those thunderstorms. And across the northwest, it will turn a bit cloudier and wetter. That's because the weather front is arriving. It'll be a bigger feature as we head into tomorrow, bringing some wet and windy weather to the northwest. But through this evening, the potential for some further torrential downpours spreading into eastern areas of England. That could bring some travel disruption, but they will ease through the night. So for many of us, it will be a dry night, clear skies, but still a fairly muggy and humid one with temperatures in the mid to high teens for many areas. A little bit cooler further north, but certainly milder than it has been here lately. Now, as I said, through Friday, we've got wet and windy weather arriving into the northwest. So first thing on Friday across western areas of Scotland, the Highlands and Western Isles, probably some outbreaks of quite heavy rain. Further east to this, it will be a bright start across parts of Aberdeenshire, also across the Borders region as well, plenty of dry and bright weather. Further south as well, a fairly bright start to the day, particularly across Wales, central areas of England, the southwest as well. But in the southeast, there is a chance of some further heavy downpours through Friday morning. These bring a risk of further thunderstorms as well. Away from that, though, it should be another dry and bright day for many of us. Still feeling very warm in the sunshine across many areas of the UK. But across the north and west, where this wet and windy weather is spreading into parts of Northern Ireland and much of Scotland through Friday afternoon, it will turn a little bit fresher, temperatures dropping down into the teens away from the rest of the UK. Temperatures elsewhere still in the mid to high 20s and still feeling quite humid through Friday daytime. Into Friday evening, this band of rain will continue to push southeastwards through this evening to bring outbreaks of rain to many areas through Saturday, particularly in the southeast. That will clear away to the east for Sunday, but there's further rain arriving into the west later on. Bye-bye.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News. The latest GB News travel.
Good afternoon, I'm John Vincent. Slow traffic on the M8 eastbound in Edinburgh at Junction 1 Hermiston Gate, and there's also a police incident nearby at the Calder Junction. Queues on the M5 northbound in Worcestershire due to an earlier caravan fire between Junction 8 for the M50 and 7 for Worcester, although all lanes have reopened. The usual slow traffic for the M5 northbound in the West Midlands to join the M6 at Junction 8. We got queues on the M27 westbound in Hampshire. It's all due to an accident in the roadworks at Junction 8 for Hamble. Queues on the M1 northbound in Hertfordshire. There's a lane closed for a vehicle having a tyre change between Junction 8 Hemel Hempstead and 9 for Redbourne. And we're seeing stop-start traffic on the M25 anti-clockwise in Kent at the Dartford tunnels. Estimated travel time 35 minutes. And that's the latest traffic and travel news.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website gbnews.com.
You really could become the next big Great British Giveaway winner with your chance to win £30,000 in tax-free cash to spend on anything you like. Listen to what some of our previous winners have to say about winning big with us.
On the day that I got the money in the bank account, everything just seemed a lot sunnier.
But I do have something to spend it on.
Just go for it. It's an absolute must.
Thank you, GB News.
Amazing feeling to win.
For another chance to win £30,000 in tax-free cash, text cash to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries cost £2 or post your name and number to GB07 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 30th of August. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Tune in to Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan. GB News royalty with your perfect start to the weekend. Lucky us. Feisty and fearless guests.
Well, I'm a normal person, so ask me.
Honest opinions that raises more questions than a Gary Barlow tax return. And a few surprises along the way. Might be cold in this studio. That is Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan. 8 to 9 only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry. Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
A very good afternoon to you. It's 4 p.m. and welcome to the Martin Daubney Show on GB News, broadcasting live from the heart of Westminster and all across the UK. Now, in the next few minutes, we'll cross the line to Downing Street, where Sir Keir Starmer will speak about the recent rise of violence following the killings in Southport and subsequent riots across the United Kingdom. And the 17-year-old charged with those murders in Southport has now been named. Axel Rudakanabana appeared at Liverpool Crown Court this morning and was remanded into custody. And locals in Aldershot were left stunned last night after a peaceful protest at a hotel for asylum seekers drew a police response befitting of a full-blown riot, with a helicopter, police dogs and multiple riot vans deployed. I'll speak to one of the protest organisers who believes that heavy-handed policing is fanning the flames of civil unrest. And that's all coming between now and 6 o'clock. Now, top story is the disorder across the country last night. Protesters clashed with police in London, Manchester and Hartlepool. Angry crowds threw flares and bottles at the gates of Downing Street. More than 100 people were arrested there, and we're about to cross live to the Prime Minister. But ahead of that, we're going to have some analysis here in the studio with Chris Hope. So, Chris, we're just waiting for that press conference with Sir Keir Starmer. Ahead of that, let's look back at some of those scenes we can see there at the Cenotaph last night. A lot of people feeling that was a ripple effect of what we saw in Southport, the riots there. We've seen them across Manchester, other towns. Is this a crossroads where we have to get a grip on the state of policing? A lot of people feel we have two-tiered policing. A lot of people feel that they soft-soap the pro-Palestine brigade, as we can see here, get tooled up when they go into what you would call patriots. Do you think Sir Keir Starmer has been forced into action by what we've seen this week, and what do you expect to happen?
I think Keir Starmer's got to find a way to talk to these people. I mean, you can't just dismiss them, as they might try to in this press conference shortly, as right-wingers, thugs, EDL sympathisers, Tommy Robinson. That just almost puts them into a box and let's not talk to them, and then talk about other things and dealing more with community relations, faith leaders. You've got to talk to them and say, and almost show them, I think, that the policing is the same for all communities, not unfairly tough on white communities, because that is certainly the concern that we're seeing, aren't we? We're reading about, and that's the worry.
In fact, we can now cross to the Prime Minister now.
This pain is unimaginable, and so I call on everyone to give them, and indeed the wider community at Southport, the space to grieve, and time for the authorities in Merseyside to do their job. There will be a time for questions, and we will make sure that the victims and families in Southport are at the heart of that process. That's the very least that we owe these families. But we also owe them justice. So while there's a prosecution that must not be prejudiced, for them to receive the justice that they deserve, the time for answering those questions is not now. And I remind everyone that the price for a trial that is prejudiced is ultimately paid by the victims and their families who are deprived of the justice that they deserve. Let me now turn to the actions of a tiny, mindless minority in our society. Because in the aftermath of this attack, the community of Southport had to suffer twice. A gang of thugs got on trains and buses, went to a community that is not their own, a community grieving the most horrific tragedy, and then proceeded to throw bricks at police officers who just 24 hours earlier had been having to deal with an attack on children in their community. And make no mistake, whether it's in Southport, London or Hartlepool, these people are showing our country exactly who they are. Mosques targeted because they're mosques. Flares thrown at the statue of Winston Churchill. A Nazi salute at the Cenotaph. And so I've just held a meeting with senior police and law enforcement leaders where we've resolved to show who we are. A country that will not allow understandable fear to curdle into division and hate in our communities, and that will not permit, under any circumstances, a breakdown in law and order on our streets. Because let's be very clear about this. It's not protest, it's not legitimate, it's crime, violent disorder. an assault on the rule of law and the execution of justice. And so, on behalf of the British people, who expect their values and their security to be upheld, we will put a stop to it. I want to thank all of the police officers across the country who have already, as they do so often, stood up to intimidation and violence in the past few days and indeed throughout the summer. And let me be clear, this afternoon was not about pointing the finger of blame. That is not how this government of service conducts its business, because it doesn't work. Rather, this was a meeting to pull together our response, a response both to the immediate challenge, which is clearly driven by far-right hatred, but also all violent disorder that flares up, whatever the apparent cause or motivation. We make no distinction. Crime is crime, and so to that end, I can announce today that following this meeting, we will establish a national capability across police forces to tackle violent disorder. These thugs are mobile, they move from community to community, and we must have a policing response that can do the same. Shared intelligence, wider deployment of facial recognition technology, and preventative action, criminal behaviour orders to restrict their movements before they can even board a train, in just the same way that we do with football hooligans. And let me also say to large social media companies and those who run them, violent disorder clearly whipped up online, that is also a crime. It's happening on your premises, and the law must be upheld everywhere. That is the single most important duty of government. Service rests on security, and we will take all necessary action to keep our streets safe. I'll now take a number of questions from the media. I'm going to start with Alex from BBC.
Prime Minister, thank you very much indeed. Alex Forsyth, BBC News. Can I ask, how concerned are you that the violence that we've seen may spread? Are you providing extra police resources? Are you preparing any clampdown on the far-right groups that are being blamed for this? And indeed, if you are, how can you, given that they're often very disparate? And if I may, are you satisfied with the way the BBC's handled the Hugh Edwards case? Thank you.
Yeah, well, Alex, in relation to the violence that we've seen, the whole point on pulling together the meeting today was to have a coordinated response. The clear message from police and law enforcement is not that they need more powers. I think we have to wean ourselves off the idea that the only response is to pass more legislation every time we have a challenge in front of us. Is to use the existing powers that we've got, pulling together the intelligence, the data, making sure that that is being shared across police forces, and that as these groups sort of bounce from chief constable to chief constable around the country, we have the same response, robust response to them, and that we're clear that this is violent disorder, it's not protest, and that needs to be the starting position of the policing response to it. In relation to Hugh Edwards, look, I'm shocked and appalled, I'm sure, as everybody is in relation to this, and the Culture Secretary is meeting the Director General of the BBC later on today. Thank you, Alex. I'm going to try and wean people off the 2 or 3 questions in one, if I may, because otherwise we just won't get through. I've got actually Paul from Channel 4 next.
Thanks, Keir. You mentioned there the national capability across all police forces. We've spoken to your new Labour MP in Hartlepool today, and he says that Cleveland Police were simply overwhelmed. They don't have the number of police officers to deal with what they had to deal with. So will you be fast-tracking the recruitment of more police officers? Will what you're announcing today actually increase the number of police officers on the street?
Well, we've already made a commitment to increasing police numbers. That's a commitment we made into the general election, and particularly police officers to work in neighbourhood policing, and that did come up in the meeting today in terms of the capability that's needed. But look, Paul, to be frank, what happens in the next few weeks matters, and that isn't a question on its own of recruitment, which takes longer. It is a question of coordinating the response, making sure the capability that we've got to share intelligence, share data, have a coordinated response, and to act as quickly as possible in cases so that arrests are followed swiftly by charging. It is an attempt to pull that together so that those that engage in criminal behaviour, which this is, will feel the full force of the law very quickly. And I think that's the most important aspect coming out of this meeting this afternoon. Thank you. I've got Shihab from ITV.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Shihab Khan from ITV News. Prime Minister, how do you stop the far right from hijacking issues, especially when so many members of those groups often say they are being influenced by charismatic leaders who are often pushing for the division that you say that you want to tackle? And a second quick question, if I may. British Muslims up and down the country will have seen these riots or demonstrations, whatever you like to call them, unfold. They've seen mosques get attacked. They've watched as shops have been looted. There have been chants which some would say are grossly offensive. Partly this has happened because of misinformation. They now say they feel unsafe. What is your message to the British Muslim community, and what are you willing to do to make sure they feel safe in their own home?
Well, taking both parts of that, I think it is really important to emphasise over and over again the price paid for those that put out misinformation and interfere in the work that the authorities are trying to do in Southport. The price is paid ultimately by the mums and dads who are grieving their children. Because if there isn't a fair trial that gives them the justice they demand, they are the ones that are going to suffer the most. And so nobody should pretend that they are speaking for those families when they involve themselves in activity like this. Because they are putting what is now the single most important thing for those families, which is to grieve properly and to have the justice to which they are entitled. And that's why this is so important. In relation to the Muslim community, look, let me be very clear. I will take every step that's necessary to keep you safe. And that's why I said what I said about mosques being attacked because they're mosques. The far right is showing who they are. We have to show who we are in response to that, and that's why we pulled together this response this afternoon to try and coordinate and make sure that as we face the next few days and weeks, we have the strongest possible response in order to ensure that there is safety for all of our citizens, including those Muslims who will see, as you rightly say, attacks on their mosques because they're mosques. Thank you. I've got John from Sky.
Thank you. John Craig from Sky News. You've talked about better coordination. Clearly that's one of the purposes of this meeting. How concerned are you about perhaps apparent inconsistencies of approach by police forces? For example, 4 arrests in Southport, over 100 here, different groups being treated differently, whether it's far left, far right, as some have suggested. Resources you've mentioned, smaller forces not being able to cope. We saw, didn't we, in Southport that Merseyside had to call in help from other forces. You've said no to extra police powers, but what about banning some of these far right groups, as Angela Rayner has suggested?
Well, look, in relation to the inconsistency, I don't think you can simply measure the number of arrests and say there's an inconsistency, because that will depend event by event. But look, yes, this afternoon was an attempt and an agreement, actually, to pull together a national response so that that consistency, that support is there, and the sharing of intelligence and data. That's not a criticism of any of the forces that are trying to deal with difficult situations as they arise on their patch, but it is to give them the support that they need more quickly so that they can react more robustly. In relation to preventative measures, one of the issues that came up this afternoon, is criminal behaviour orders, which can be attached to convictions for these sorts of offences, which then give the police and the authorities the ability to put their arms around and have a tighter grip of those that have already shown their true colours and been convicted. And I would personally like to see more use of those orders in the same way that they're used in football hooligan cases to stop people travelling, identify and prevent their patterns of behaviour. Because these are not people who are going to protest. You don't go to protest with a rock in your hand. You go to commit violent disorder. And we need to be really clear about that. And I think those orders would help us in the preventative space. Thank you very much. I've got Jason from the Mail.
Thanks, PM. Do you welcome the decision to name the suspect in this case, apparently taken to end some of the disinformation? And this is a pretty unusual summit for August. People are going on holiday now. Are you worried about we could be facing a sort of summer of riots?
Well, firstly, on the naming of the individual, that's a matter, obviously, for the court. A decision's been taken today, so that is now in the public domain. I won't say more about that because the purpose of the rules in relation to the information that's available is to ensure there can be a fair trial, and my starting point on that is very much the victims and their families, because you know, and I have seen this in other cases, the price for a trial that goes wrong is paid by the family and friends and victims of crime. In this case, I can't imagine the added pain that would be piled on in this case if there was anything that got in the way of the trial of this particular issue. Look, in relation to what happens over the next few weeks and months, it is obvious to me, and I think obvious to anybody looking in, that so far as the far right is concerned, this is coordinated, this is deliberate, this is not a protest that has got out of hand. It is a group of individuals who are absolutely bent on violence. And that's why it's important, I think, to pull together the senior police and law enforcement leaders, as we did today, to ensure that that is met with the most robust response in the coming days and weeks. I've got Aubrey from The Times.
Thank you, Prime Minister. You said that violent disorder is being whipped up online. What are you going to do to combat that spread of disinformation? Are you going to haul in social media companies? Could you restart the rapid rebuttal unit in Whitehall? And what is your message to Nigel Farage, who obviously asked this week whether the truth is being withheld? Do you think that was responsible for anything?
In relation to the platform providers, some of it isn't as complicated as it may at first seem. So inciting violence online is a criminal offence. And that is not a matter of free speech. It is a criminal offence. Clearly, in relation to platform providers, there's a balance to be struck. Social media platform providers, it's an amazing opportunity that we all enjoy as a country, that is very important to us, that these platforms are there to be used for the great opportunities that they provide. There is also a responsibility that goes with it. That's a space for a mature conversation to take place. In relation to the comments of others, look, I'm not going to stand here and cast judgment on what others are saying. I know what I'm saying, and I know why I'm saying it very, very clearly, which is my focus, whenever I'm confronted with any questions about this, is on the families and victims of those, particularly in Southport, who were so affected by this. I would also add the police officers. I had the privilege of going up the day after this incident to speak to the police officers who had to deal in responding, the first responders to this. Remarkably but unsurprisingly, they were back on duty. I was able to thank them for what they had done, but I'm not going to pretend to you that they weren't affected by what they had to witness, what they'd had to deal with. They said to me, as they always do, I was simply doing my job, and of course they were. But doing your job, you know, there's no way what happened to them or what they had to endure, had to respond to, was anything other than extraordinarily challenging. And I think that if we all start with a clear focus on the victims, their families, and the police officers who had to respond to this horrific attack, that would be a good template or framework for the discussion of all of these matters. I've got Rowena from The Guardian.
Rowena Mason from The Guardian. Nigel Farage is the leader of Reform. He did very well, obviously, in the election, and he's been accused of spreading conspiracy theories about the Southport tragedy and his response to it. Is it enough to say that you just won't comment on what he's said, given that some people, including a former police chief, have linked his comments to the violence that broke out in the riots?
Look, I'm not going to run a sort of running commentary on the motives of other people. what I am saying is my focus is on the families, the victims who are at the heart of this, and I think that that should be the focus for everybody. Anybody who says or does anything that impedes their ability to get the justice that they deserve cannot claim to be acting in their best interests, because they're not. Thank you. And I've got John from the Mirror.
Hello, thank you. What consequences will there be if social media firms do fail to take action?
Well, I think there's a discussion to be had, and it is a balance, and it needs to be the right balance, because social media is a fantastic opportunity, but it also carries responsibility, and that's the mature discussion that we've had. What we've done today is have a discussion with law enforcement and the police, which is about pulling things together for a coordinated response. What has not worked well recently with the previous government, in my view, is the performative politics of a government blaming everybody else and pointing fingers. That approach to me is not effective. It's the performative politics that I've put an end to with a government of service. My approach is different, which is to roll my sleeves up, get the relevant people around the table and fix the problems and meet the challenges that we have as a country. We did that with law enforcement and the police this afternoon. A similar approach with social media, which is not performative politics, which gets you nowhere, but the politics of service, which is to actually work together to address the challenges that we have and make sure that we keep the country safe and respect the values of our fellow citizens, which are about law enforcement, security and safety. Thank you all very much indeed.
There you guys.
OK, that was the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, giving a national briefing on law and order. An astonishing press conference, in my opinion. Let me take you through a few of the more major points before I have a conversation about them with Chris Hope, our political editor in the studio here. He said a tiny, mindless minority of our society, a gang of thugs, got on trains and buses and threw bricks at police officers in Southport. He then talked about mosques being targeted and talked about Nazi salutes in London. Division and fear has been allowed to prosper. I will not permit a breakdown of law and order. An incredible statement then. He talked about these protests this week. He said, this is not legitimate protesting and we will put a stop to it. He then went on to talk about a national capability to respond to this. These thugs are mobile. We will have shared intelligence, including facial recognition, before these thugs can even get on a train, treating them, he said, like football hooligans. He then laid blame at the foot of the social media companies with severe hints there may be a clampdown on freedom of speech on social media platforms. This is happening on your premises, he said. He then promised a clampdown on far-right groups and was then asked by a succession of favourable journalists from Channel 4, from the ITV, from Sky News, from The Times, from The Guardian, from The Mirror. Chris Hope, where do we begin? I mean, I was at that protest last night at the Cenotaph. I was handcuffed as a journalist for filming it. I was trying to give people there the opportunity to speak, to vent their feelings. They don't feel like they're being listened to. They don't feel like they're being treated with equality before the police. They do think there is two-tier policing. They see this type of approach against them, and, for example, not in Hare Hills last week as all pro-Palestine protests. They see that as two-tier policing. They feel they're getting the rough end of the pineapple. Do you think Sir Keir Starmer's speech today has in any way addressed those fears, or does this to you just feel like a clampdown?
Well, Martin, I should say that GBNews asked for a question. We had a reporter, Mark White, our Home and Security Editor, in the audience to ask a question. We weren't called by number 10. It took 8 questions, 4 from broadcasters, 4 from newspapers, not from... We said we couldn't ask the question. I thought the Sky News question was the nearest we got to the idea of two-tier policing.
He talked about the far left. At least it was mentioned once.
Yeah, but what you have here is Sir Keir Starmer, he's trying to... I mean, no one would say chucking bricks at the police is legitimate protest, but what he's not going anywhere near, which I think is the problem with that, is an attempt to analyse why people are rioting in the way they have done. Why are they frustrated? What is behind that? He made no attempt in that, I think, to understand why they're cross, why they're furious. Football hooligans are a different thing altogether, but he certainly likened people who are concerned about double standards, concerned about not being listened to football hooligans. I don't see how that's going to help de-escalate what is a difficult situation already in the country.
I just want to read out a few comments that we've had in from you, the viewers and listeners of GB News, during that. Hundreds of comments pouring in. Let's just read out a few of them now. Barry says this: I cannot believe the Prime Minister just said this is not legitimate protesting. Has he seriously just said that? In my opinion, things could just about to get a lot worse. Jane has this: what ordinary folk are going to want to join the police force now when they are the state's enforcers? Lenny says this: I have simply now lost all faith in the government after this statement. Gary adds this: he mentions the rioters constantly as belonging to the far right. Who'd have thought it? We just want to be listened to. We are fed up of being called far right, racists, thugs. Don't these people understand? This is actually exacerbating matters, not helping them. Chris, that's just a sample.
I think Gary summarises it there. I mean, I think that, yes, it's not legitimate the way that the riots we saw in Southport or elements of what happened in Whitehall last night and elsewhere in the country, but almost to ignore why that is happening. If the government had showed a degree of trying to say, well, why are people behaving like this? They don't want to be out rioting, I don't think. Then it might get towards addressing the issue. I don't think virtually anything that was said in there will touch the sides of addressing the reason why people were rioting and are upset about what happened last night.
What strikes me as well is a lack of community engagement. There's a total delegitimisation of anybody who would even choose to go to any of these protests. And it feels to me... What do you think out there? I think that was an incredible press conference, and I'm actually a bit flabbergasted.
Well, we you know, the attack on the mosque in Southport was appalling,
Yeah,
is appalling. The protests you were seeing, I just don't think that the PM in that press conference has gone any way to try and understand this issue that we here at GB News of so-called two-tier policing. That's the impression viewers, listeners of a channel are getting. What's the government's answer? And I think there's barely any attempt to go there apart from attacking people who are concerned.
OK, thank you very much. Now we have to cross to GB News' Homeland Security editor Mark White, who was in that press conference and joins us now from Downing Street. Mark, you were there, you're in the room, we've had response here. What was your response from actually being in the room to what I felt was an astonishing announcement by Sir Keir Starmer?
Well, you know, I think Christopher Hope absolutely hit the nail on the head when he said there was no issue mentioned at all in terms of addressing the wider societal concerns here. And indeed, I wasn't chosen to ask a question. If I was, the question was going to be, yes, of course, violence and disorder we rightly condemn, but does he also acknowledge that there are simmering tensions, deep anger in many communities around the country at what they see as a disintegration of the social fabric within those communities? And if so, what would he do to address those concerns? And we got none of that. It was condemnation, of course, of what he said was criminality. It was, he said quite explicitly, not protest in any way, it was criminality. So anyone that did turn out that was concerned, that did want to protest, they, as far as the Prime Minister is concerned, are lumped in with those who were involved in the violence and the criminality. No room, it seems, for him to acknowledge that there are wider concerns that perhaps feed this.
Mark White, what struck me as well, in stark contrast, for example, when we've seen civil unrest in places like Hare Hills or Muslim communities, we always hear about community engagement, about listening to the community, understanding the plights, their concerns, what drives their social unrest. Nothing at all along those lines today, Mark White. This felt like a new clampdown.
Well, I think certainly they came out with the explicit intention of showing that they were determined to get control of what they saw was a criminal element, or they see as a criminal element that is orchestrating the violence that has occurred in recent days. And that was the message, that was what they wanted to hammer home in the press conference. Now, I'm not saying that in the coming days and weeks we won't get something that is more wider in scope, that actually does acknowledge and address those wider community tensions, because they are there, they do exist, and they've been simmering not just for weeks. But it wasn't Southport. Southport, in some respects, has been a trigger, but there are many other issues that have been building up over not just weeks or months, but years, that are coming, it seems, to a head now. And that is of major concern, because if you have societies and or communities across society who feel that they are so enraged that they want to take to the street and protest, and then there are those elements within these protests who are bent on some kind of disorder, it doesn't take much, because I've seen it so many times with protests in the past, for those more unruly elements to spark disorder, and for others who are caught up in that just to get involved, and for it really to spread. And we've seen it already just in the space of 2 days, going from one community, Southport, to 4 communities now in Hartlepool, and of course in Aldershot and in Manchester, and right here in London, just yards from where I'm standing at the moment.
Mark White, it was a simply incredible statement, and there's so much detail to unpack over the coming days. Thank you very much for joining us live from Downing Street. Now, moving on, the 17-year-old male charged with the murder of 3 girls killed in Southport has now been named as Axel Ruda-Canabana. He appeared before Liverpool Crown Court this morning. Elsie Dot Stankham, Alice Aguiar and BB King died after a mass stabbing at a dance session on Hart Street on Monday. The teenager has also been charged with 10 counts of attempted murder and the possession of a bladed article. And joining us now live from Liverpool Crown Court is GBNews' national reporter Charlie Peters. Charlie, thank you for joining us. So finally, the anonymity has been waived. It seems the public interest, the huge pressure, and that involves, of course, that civil unrest in Southport has forced the hand, and the suspect has been named. Charlie, tell us more.
Well, Martin, Axel Ruda-Canabana attended 2 different courts here in Liverpool this morning. First, a youth court where he was addressed and the charges were put towards him. Those 3 counts of murder, 10 for attempted murder, and another for possession of an offensive blade. That was a kitchen knife with a curve, as it was described in the lower court. He was then moved to the Crown Court for discussions on bail and remand, where there was also the discussion about lifting the anonymity order. In both courts, he did not speak, but he was named, and that anonymity restriction was lifted by Mr. Justice Menery, who had to deal with 2 competing legal perspectives. One from the prosecution and the youth justice team, who said that the defendant's welfare would be at risk if his anonymity was removed. He is going to turn 18 in just 6 days. That was also raised, but there was also a protestation from the press, who said, and which the judge agreed with, that if there was a vacuum of information, then there would be more rioting in the streets, as within that vacuum, misinformation had filled the space about the perpetrator, about the motive. And so more information on the suspect and who the Crown has charged with these crimes needed to come forward. Now, Mr. Justice Menery agreed with that. He said that idiotic rioting had filled the vacuum with online nonsense caused by all of that silence. But that information now in the public domain, that Axel Ruda-Canabana has been charged with 3 counts of murder, 10 of attempted murder, and a possession of a bladed article. On the attempted murder charges, just 2 of those alleged victims were named. That was Leanne Lucas, who ran the Taylor Swift yoga dance class on Monday in Southport when that mass stabbing took place, and John Hayes, a local. The other 8 alleged victims victims of attempted murder could not be named because they are children. But there was also some good news from Liverpool today, and that was with regards to the situation on those who are recovering after that attack. Alder Hey Hospital said that 2 of the children involved in Monday's awful incident have now been discharged. They went on to say that 5 children are still being treated from the situation in Southport on Monday, including one transferred to us from Aintree University Hospital. And they can say that all of the children in their care are now in a stable condition. So positive news on that front after a devastating incident on Monday where 17-year-old Axel Rudakabana has been charged with 3 counts of murder, 10 of attempted murder and possession of a bladed article in public.
Thank you, Charlie Peters, for that comprehensive update from Liverpool Crown Court. Thank you very much. Now, I'll bring you a reaction to what the Prime Minister said about the riots later in the show. So much to talk about. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update brought to you from the Met Office. Through this evening, thunderstorms will continue across parts of England. Hail and flooding is a risk with those thunderstorms. And across the northwest, it will turn a bit cloudier and wetter. That's because a weather front is arriving. It'll be a bigger feature as we head into tomorrow, bringing some wet and windy weather to the northwest. But through this evening, the potential for some further torrential downpours spreading into eastern areas of England. That could bring some travel disruption, but they will ease through the night. So for many of us, it will be a dry night, clear skies, but still a fairly muggy and humid one with temperatures in the mid to high teens for many areas. A little bit cooler further north, but certainly milder than it has been here lately. Now, as I said, through Friday, we've got wet and windy weather arriving into the northwest. So first thing on Friday across western areas of Scotland, the Highlands and Western Isles, probably some outbreaks of quite heavy rain. Further east to this, it will be a bright start across parts of Aberdeenshire, also across the Borders region as well, plenty of dry and bright weather. Further south as well, a fairly bright start to the day, particularly across Wales, central areas of England, the southwest as well. But in the southeast, there is a chance of some further heavy downpours through Friday morning. These bring a risk of further thunderstorms as well. Away from that, though, it should be another dry and bright day for many of us. Still feeling very warm in the sunshine across many areas of the UK. But across the north and west, where this wet and windy weather is spreading into parts of Northern Ireland and much of Scotland through Friday afternoon, it will turn a little bit fresher, temperatures dropping down into the teens away from the rest of the UK. Temperatures elsewhere still in the mid to high 20s and still feeling quite humid through Friday daytime. Into Friday evening, this band of rain will continue to push southeastwards through this evening to bring outbreaks of rain to many areas through Saturday, particularly in the southeast. That will clear away to the east for Sunday, but there's further rain arriving into the west later on. Bye-bye.
The latest GB News travel.
Good afternoon, I'm John Vincent. Queues on the M1 northbound in West Yorkshire. There's a lane closed for a broken down van just before junction 40 Ossett. Slow for the M5 northbound in Worcestershire. 2 lanes closed there for an accident between junction 8, the M50 interchange, and 7 for Worcester. The usual slow traffic for the M5 northbound in the West Midlands to join the M6 at junction 8. Slow for the M27 westbound in Hampshire following an earlier accident at junction 8 for Hamble. We've got queuing traffic in Hertfordshire. First, M25 clockwise, 2 lanes closed for an overturned car at junction 17 Maple Cross. And also in Hertfordshire on the M1 northbound, there's queues for a vehicle needing a tyre change between junction 8 Hemel Hempstead and 9 for Redbourne. And slow on the M25 anti-clockwise in Kent at the Dartford tunnels. And that's the latest traffic and travel news.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website gbnews.com.
Welcome back. It's 4:39. I'm Martin Daubney on GB. Got to say, we've had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of your says come in off the back of that announcement at Downing Street there by Sir Keir Starmer a short while ago about a new police operation to clamp down on far-right thugs. He called them a tiny, mindless minority. Loads to talk about that later in the show. Please keep your thoughts coming in. gbnews.com/your say is the way to do that. Now, moving on, Chancellor Rachel Reeves says cancelling adult social care charging reforms will save £1.1 billion by the end of the year. Now, this comes as Labour helped to tackle a black hole in the public finances that they claim was left by the Conservative Party. Well, the director of Silver Voices, Dennis Reed, who set up a petition to save the winter fuel payment, joins me now. Welcome to the show, Dennis. A noble petition that many of our viewers will no doubt be behind. Can we start with that? What motivated you to do that, and how many people have signed so far, and how can people get involved?
Well, as soon as the announcement was made on Monday by the new Chancellor, I had hundreds of emails from our members expressing their disgust, if you like, at the shock decision to cancel the winter fuel payment for 10 million older people, which will plunge immediately millions of pensioners into fuel poverty this winter, and they'll have to choose between heating and eating. So the first thing we did was obviously to set up this petition, which has gained a lot of momentum. I think it's got 23,000 signatures now and growing fast all the time. So I hope your viewers will sign it on change.org and look up for Save the Winter Fuel Payment. So yes, that will certainly be a great help. I think Labour have made a major mistake here, and unless they reverse it, the decision is going to haunt them throughout the 5 years of their government, because older people have got long memories on these sorts of things, as we found with the triple lock during the last Parliament.
Dennis Reed, when you look back at some of the support that Rachel Reeves and others in the government have given to protecting the winter fuel payment historically, and now they're in power, hey presto, there's another U-turn. Could I also draw your attention, Dennis, to something else that leapt out at me yesterday, and something which I think has all the feelings of a backdoor dementia tax. You remember the dementia tax, the hated tax that Theresa May proposed to introduce, almost cost of the general election in 2017. Such was the violent backlash to that. And of course, this is about draining down on your savings and indeed your property to pay for long-term care. Now, that had been capped. The ultimate amount you'd have to pay by the Boris Johnson regime at £86,000. But Rachel Reeves announced the other day it will not be possible to take forward these charging reforms. Dennis Reed, does that say to you that people's life savings could now be drained down to pay for their social care?
Well, they already are being. There's thousands of people each year who have to sell their family homes in order to pay for their residential care if they've got dementia, and you're quite right to categorise it as a form of dementia tax. This was an equally reprehensible policy announcement by the Chancellor earlier this week, and it's going to really rebound on them again, because you're not going to be able to solve the problems in the NHS, waiting lists and so on, without sorting out social care first. Because so many people are in hospital because they haven't got proper social care at home. And unless that's dealt with, then they're going to have a real struggle to realise their promises on the NHS. So it's a short-term decision. Again, our members are really angry about this. We actually also have an older petition on the same site on exactly what you're saying. People should not have to sell their homes in order to pay for their astronomical social care costs.
Now, Dennis, of course, the Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, and the Labour Party would say we are so in the debt, in the burden of debt, £22 billion, the black hole, but it's actually £2.7 trillion in national debt, largely thanks to reckless spending during lockdowns and all the rest of it. So they would argue that we simply cannot afford this. But are you saying, Dennis Reed, that to rely on pensioners to drain their life savings, I mean, what message does that send out to those who work hard, who pay their taxes, who put money aside, have a nest egg to take care of themselves, and those on benefits, they don't have to worry. They get everything paid for themselves?
Well, the immediate reaction from our members was that why is the Chancellor targeting older people? Now, there may well be a case that the Chancellor wants to say about the legacy that has been left for them. But these are all political choices. And a political choice was made to give large pay increases to the public sector. Now, they may well be justifiable. but it was a political decision taken. Equally, a political decision was taken to reduce the income of 10 million pensioners. Now, that is not fair in our view, because pensioners can only fight back through things like petitions, as we're trying to do, whereas obviously the public sector workers have strong trade unions. And to pick on the most vulnerable, if you like, and those least able to fight back is a rather cowardly attitude as far as we're concerned.
OK, thank you very much for joining us. Speaking words of wisdom there, Director of Silver Voices, Dennis Reed. Thank you very much for joining me here on GB News. Now, moving on, more anger is being directed towards hotels that are being used to house migrants. We'll be live in Aldershot to hear about the latest controversy, a clampdown again there last night. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Mark Dolan tonight is your weekend dose of news, debate and entertainment. This sounds like a wild conspiracy theory. Don't miss my big opinion. Mark Meets and my take at 10. Democracy is a funny old thing. And we don't do boring, not on my watch. I just won't have it. Let's go and get another glass of that bubbly. You've earned it. That's Mark Dolan tonight, Saturday and Sunday, 9 to 11, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Meghan Markle is threatening to support Kamala Harris, and I reckon that would be the kiss of death for her bid as a president.
Well, look, Meghan has a relationship, a friendly relationship with Kamala Harris. I firmly believe that Meghan Markle will endorse Kamala Harris for president. This story is circulating because Newsweek actually took a poll asking how many people would be influenced by a potential endorsement from the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. 40% said they would be influenced. 21 said they would vote for someone Harry and Meghan has suggested. And then 20 said that they would not vote for who Harry and Meghan suggested. I think that Meghan wants to be involved. Meghan wants to be included. This is potentially a very historic election. We really saw Meghan involved, including with Kamala Harris, some voter campaigns in 2020. And I think this is a great way for Meghan Markle to get her foot in the door. Her father, Thomas Markle, has said that she's always had political aspirations. And what better way than to be somehow involved, inserting your name in the headline with a presidential campaign like this?
Do you get the vibes, do you get the sense that she is a political animal?
I don't feel like she has tough enough skin, but I do believe that this is important to her. During that speech for the UN, she talked about writing First Lady Hillary Clinton. We saw her in 2020 work with Stacey Abrams, Hillary Clinton, Kamala Harris, and Michelle Obama to do campaigns for women voting, getting women to the polls.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back, 4:49. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News. Now, a protest outside the Potters International Hotel in Aldershot yesterday became hostile. Around 150 people attended with signs, banners and a small group confronting riot police. Locals in Rushmore made their thoughts clear about the hundreds of illegal migrants being moved into luxury flats and also hotels. And joining me now is Jez Stocking, who was at the protest yesterday. Jez, welcome to the show. We've had you on before, of course. You were campaigning before in Rushmore against 300 luxury apartments given out to asylum seekers, and now you've moved on to the Potters in International. Tell us, who was protesting there? Because it seems, we just heard from the Prime Minister, that anybody attending these sort of protests is a far-right thug.
I know, it's actually shocking. If people look through all the footage from last night, you'll probably see 50% were local women, lots of young children there, probably 200 to 300 protesters. I would say out of that 200 to 300, probably 10, 15 might have been from out of the area. But it's just, to brand people as far-right protesters is just ridiculous. What you see here in these pictures is the working man of Britain, the working man that the Labour Party used to support, and they've totally turned their back on us. This is why I believe people are out on the streets protesting. We're saying we want a voice.
And Jazz, you have concerns about people coming in from outside the area. We often know that we don't know who people can be if they're coming from overseas without paperwork. Can you tell me about then the police response that ensued? You've had many of these protests over many months, Jazz, and we can see on our screens here a very heavy-handed police response. Tell us more.
Yeah, I think we've been protesting now for 2 years at the hotel, 7 months at the flats. We've got a great police liaison officer who I deal with on a weekly basis. We've had one problem before with the police, but that was soon sorted out. And yet last night, I think a few people entered the hotel grounds and then the police swarmed on us like a hit squad. I can't believe it. I think a few people entered the hotel grounds because one of our sort of people that goes and looks around the hotels on a daily basis just to see if there's any movement. He was assaulted on Sunday afternoon, and I think people were angry about that nothing was done about that. But we were swarmed on by the police, but the police will be able to tell you not one of the protesters turned on any of the police. We see the police on our side. They're working men just like us, and I expect they're fed up with the situation in the country.
And Jazz, the BBC called you a mob. Your local MP, Alex Baker, said it was intimidating behaviour. But we can see here police helicopters, riot vans, at least 9 squad cars and dogs were even deployed into the hotel car park. Feels like, is this a taste of things to come? Sir Keir Starmer seems to want more of these kind of clampdowns. How does that make you feel?
I've just listened to Keir Starmer on the telly as a former Labour voter myself, and one of my friends just texted me who's a Labour voter. I'll never look at that man again in the same light. He's meant to be on our side. They've totally turned their back on the British people. They're allowing illegals to flood the country and fill up hotels and give them more rights than local born and bred Brits who are actually funding these illegals. It's the local MP, Alex Baker. I've had 2 meetings with her, which I think have gone very well. But yet even last night, she said these were people from outside the area. She's only lived in the area a year and a half herself, so who does she know who lives in the area and who doesn't? I live 4 miles away, but I've spent 40 years in Aldershot and people are calling me an outsider. She's been here a year and a half and she's a local embedded in the population. It's nonsense.
OK, Jess Doggett, thank you very much for joining us, and we'll make sure we keep a close eye on your protests as we move forward. Stay safe out there. Now, we have a response from the police force. The Assistant Chief Constable, Hampshire Police, Constable Paul Barmatello, has said this. The swift and decisive actions of our officers last night saw this incident brought under control, preventing further harm to the community in Aldershot. Our role is to protect people's lawful right to protest, while also preventing serious disorder and disruption to the local community. It is totally unacceptable to turn that lawful right into criminal acts, including incidents of criminal damage, racial abuse and intimidation. Our specialist teams are working hard to identify anyone who has committed a criminal offence, and we will take swift and robust action against those people. Well, Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer has said action will be taken following what he called violent disorder in parts of England in the wake of the Southport killings. You've sent me hundreds and hundreds of messages about what he said, and most of you are not very impressed. More soon. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel. Now's your weather with Annie Shuttleworth.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update brought to you from the Met Office. Through this evening, thunderstorms will continue across parts of England. Hail and flooding is a risk with those thunderstorms. And across the northwest, it will turn a bit cloudier and wetter. That's because the weather front is arriving. It'll be a bigger feature as we head into tomorrow, bringing some wet and windy weather to the northwest. But through this evening, the potential for some further torrential downpours spreading into eastern areas of England. That could bring some travel disruption, but they will ease through the night. So for many of us, it will be a dry night, clear skies, but still a fairly muggy and humid one with temperatures in the mid to high teens for many areas. A little bit cooler further north, but certainly milder than it has been here lately. Now, as I said, through Friday, we've got wet and windy weather arriving into the northwest. So first thing on Friday across western areas of Scotland, the Highlands and Western Isles, probably some outbreaks of quite heavy rain. Further east to this, it will be a bright start across parts of Aberdeenshire, also across the Borders region as well, plenty of dry and bright weather. Further south as well, a fairly bright start to the day, particularly across Wales, central areas of England, the southwest as well. But in the southeast, there is a chance of some further heavy downpours through Friday morning. These bring a risk of further thunderstorms as well. Away from that, though, it should be another dry and bright day for many of us. Still feeling very warm in the sunshine across many areas of the UK. But across the north and west, where this wet and windy weather is spreading into parts of Northern Ireland and much of Scotland through Friday afternoon, it will turn a little bit fresher, temperatures dropping down into the teens away from the rest of the UK. Temperatures elsewhere still in the mid to high 20s and still feeling quite humid through Friday daytime. Into Friday evening, this band of rain will continue to push southeastwards through this evening to bring outbreaks of rain to many areas through Saturday, particularly in the southeast. That will clear away to the east for Sunday, but there's further rain arriving into the west later on. Bye-bye.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
The latest GB News travel.
Good afternoon, I'm John Vincent. We're seeing the usual slowdown for the M5 northbound in the West Midlands to join the M6 at junction 8. Queues on the M5 northbound in Worcestershire. There's 2 lanes closed there for an accident between junction 8, the M50 interchange, and 7 for Worcester. We're seeing a slowdown in traffic on the M4 westbound near Chively. There's a lane closed for an accident between junction 13 Newbury and 14 Hungerford. That's in the roadworks area. Long delays on the M25 clockwise in Hertfordshire. 2 lanes closed for an overturned car at junction 17 Maple Cross. We're also seeing queues on the M1 northbound in Hertfordshire. Firstly, the entry slip road is partially blocked due to an accident at junction 6A for the M25, and also there's queues for a vehicle needing a tyre change at junction 8 Hemel Hempstead. And that's the latest traffic and travel news.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website gbnews.com.
Celebrate a spectacular summer with your chance to win an incredible £30,000 in tax-free cash in our Great British Giveaway. It's the biggest prize of the year so far, and it's totally tax-free. What would you spend that on? Luxury holidays, a new car, or just put it away for a rainy day? Whatever you do with £30,000 in tax-free cash, make sure you don't miss out on a chance to make it yours. For another chance to win £30,000 in tax-free cash, text CASH to 63232. Text costs £2 plus 1 standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries cost £2, or post your name and number to GB07 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 30th of August. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Tune in to Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan. GB News royalty with your perfect start to the weekend. Lucky us! Feisty and fearless guests.
Well, I'm a normal person, so ask me.
Honest opinions that raises more questions than a Gary Barlow tax return. And a few surprises along the way. Might be cold in this studio. That is Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan. 8 to 9 only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry. Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
A very good afternoon to you. It's 5 p.m. and welcome to the Martin Daubney Show on GB News. We're broadcasting live from the Holt of Westminster all across the UK. The community of Southport had to suffer twice. The words of the Prime Minister as he addressed the nation earlier today, coming as violent riots rippled across the country this week following those tragic killings in Southport. We'll have full reaction to an astonishing press conference. And the 17-year-old charged with those murders in Southport has now been named as Axel Radicubana, appeared at Liverpool Crown Court this morning and was remanded into custody. Plus, the BBC is under huge fire for continuing to pay Hugh Edwards hundreds of thousands of pounds in licence fees payers' money after they knew that he was arrested on serious grounds. And this comes as the Culture Secretary summons the BBC's boss for addressing down who knew what and when. And that's all coming up between now and 6 o'clock. Well, to the show, always a pleasure to have your company. Sir Keir Starmer addressed the nation an hour ago from Downing Street on the aftermath of the disruption we've seen across Britain, the riots in Southport and some other towns. It's an incredible statement, and I've never seen the inbox at GB News on my show go quite so wild and into overdrive. Sir Keir Starmer called those protesters a tiny, mindless minority of our society, a gang of thugs. He then promised a clampdown, facial recognition technology, treating them all like football hooligans. So much to talk about. Let your views across on gbnews.com/yoursafe. And now it's your headlines, and it's Polly Middlehurst.
Martin, thank you, and good afternoon to you. Well, as you've been hearing, the Prime Minister has just made a statement in Downing Street, and he says those who took part in riots across several cities in the UK this week were not protesting. Instead, they're guilty of violent crimes. The scenes of violence came after Monday's stabbing attack in Southport, which resulted in the deaths of 3 little girls. After thanking the police, many of whom suffered serious injuries during the disorder, the Prime Minister announced a new police response aimed at cracking down on civil disorder.
In the aftermath of this attack, the community of Southport had to suffer twice. A gang of thugs got on trains and buses, went to a community that is not their own, a community grieving the most horrific tragedy, and then proceeded to throw bricks at police officers who just 24 hours earlier had been having to deal with an attack on children in their community.
Well, in other news today, the US reporter Evan Gershkovich has been freed in a prisoner swap with Russia less than 2 weeks after he was sentenced to 16 years behind bars on charges of espionage. He's been detained since March 2023 after Russia claimed he'd been gathering secret information on CIA orders, which he denies. In return, at least 8 Russian nationals are expected to be returned to Russia, including several with suspected ties to Russian intelligence. The BBC says it was told by police not to share details of ex-newsreader Hugh Edwards' arrest for offences related to images of child abuse. It comes after it was revealed that the former news presenter was arrested in November but continued to be employed by the corporation until April. In a statement, the BBC said that at the time, no charges had been brought against Mr Edwards, and it was also aware of a significant risk to his health. He pleaded guilty yesterday to charges related to receiving indecent images of children during an online chat, including sexually abusive images of children as young as 7 years old. In the United States, Donald Trump has sparked outrage after questioning the racial heritage of Kamala Harris. Speaking to a panel of black journalists, the former president falsely claimed Ms. Harris had changed from identifying as Indian American to black. His suggestion that the vice president was using her race for political advantage drew gasps from the audience in Chicago.
I don't think I've ever been asked a question so
in such a horrible manner, first question. You don't even say, hello, how are you?
Do you believe that Vice President Kamala Harris is only on the ticket because she is a black woman?
Well, I didn't know she was black until a number of years ago when she happened to turn black, and now she wants to be known as black. So I don't know, is she Indian or is she black?
She is always identified as a black woman.
I
She went to a
respect
historically
either
black
one.
college.
I respect either one, but she obviously doesn't.
Well, responding to that conversation, Kamala Harris, who's the daughter of a Jamaican father and an Indian mother, gave this reaction.
Donald Trump spoke at the annual meeting of the National Association of Black Journalists. And it was the same old show. The divisiveness and the disrespect.
Kamala Harris. Now news here at home, and the Bank of England has cut its base rate of interest to 5%, marking the first reduction since March 2020. The rate had been held at 5.25% since August last year, which was the highest level since 2008. It comes as new data suggests the cost of living crisis is easing thanks to inflation cooling off. And new rules and safeguards surrounding the ownership of XL bully dogs have come into effect in Scotland today. The new terms make it a criminal offence to own the breed without an exemption certificate, and it's an offence to have an XL bully out in public without a lead or a muzzle. The rules are similar to those introduced in England in December, which made it illegal to breed, sell, advertise, rehome or abandon an XL bully dog. And lastly, GPs in England have voted to limit the number of appointments available today in their first collective action since 1964. NHS England says it could cause significant disruption across the whole health service. The British Medical Association says it's taking action over what it describes as a lack of funding for GPs, and it comes despite the Health Secretary warning that while the previous government failed to recruit enough doctors, reducing services would only punish patients. And those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Polly Middlehurst. I'm back in half an hour. See you then.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thank you very much, Polly. Now we start with the fallout from the riots following the killing of 3 young girls in Southport. And Keir Starmer has promised that police officers and vowing to tackle violent disorder. The Prime Minister said the countrywide scenes meant the community of Southport had to suffer twice. Well, GB News' Home and Security Editor Mark White is on Downing Street. Mark, welcome to the show. You were in that press conference there, and I thought an astonishing press conference. It sounds very much like a clampdown is on the way. I've never seen the GB News inbox go quite so wild. Mark White, bring us up to speed.
Well, this was a news conference in which the Prime Minister had one clear message that he wanted to get across, and that was, in his eyes, that the protests that have taken place in recent days are being hijacked and orchestrated by criminals. This was a criminal endeavour and nothing less, according to the Prime Minister. And the law, he said, would deal with this and deal with it going forward. That's why, of course, he brought the Chief Constables, other senior policing figures, the Home Secretary, the Justice Secretary, representatives from the Crown Prosecution Service and others here to Downing Street to determine the best way of tackling this disorder should it spread. But of course that's one dimension of this particular issue. It is talking about how they deal with the disorder that might play out on our streets. What wasn't discussed in any capacity, and there were no questions asked that addressed this either, are the underlying tensions that there are undoubtedly in communities right across the country. What people have seen, many people have seen in their communities and believe is the disintegration of the fabric of their society and in those communities, and there has been growing levels of anger. The issues, of course, around Southport have, I'm sure, proved a trigger point for some. But to be honest, this was, I think, inevitable. We were always going to get to a stage where, just as we're seeing across the Irish Sea, in the Irish Republic, with seething anger that have spilled over very regularly into disorder in those communities, the same sort of tensions were likely to spill over in communities here. Now, it's to be hoped that 2 days of this disorder will be an end to the actual disorder, but we just don't know. And the police are preparing for it. And we've been hearing from some of those policing leaders. I spoke to Andy Marsh, who is the Chief Constable responsible for the College of Policing. And we spoke about the clear concerns that people have about two-tier policing, that people feel the protests in Hare Hills that then descended into a riot with buses being set alight, etc., were managed in a different way to the protests that then turned into disorder in other locations. Chief amongst them, London, yesterday, when 111 people were arrested. Was there two-tier policing? He said that there is standard policing approach and that it does vary from location to location, depending on what the ground commanders see and perceive as the threat of the day. The other issue, which is an interesting issue, of course, which is lessons to be learned, perhaps, from the disinformation that was put out on social media. I asked him directly, should the police learn lessons from this going forward and perhaps be a bit more proactive in getting a message out that debunks these social media disinformation messages as they're put out. This is what he told me.
Well, I hope people would be reassured to know that the College of Policing will be convening every police force next week to debrief what's happened, share good practice and prepare to do even better in the future about that consistent approach that you mentioned. I personally believe that openness and transparency is an antidote to mistrust, and we talked today about at the round table about how we can get as much information out as possible without ever compromising a prosecution, because then the victims' families will suffer. So I do believe we can get more information out more quickly, and I committed today to work on body-worn video doctrine, for example, to look at cases where we should get body-worn video out more quickly in specific incidents to say this is what happened.
So it'll be interesting to see what happens in the nights ahead, of course, with other potential protests likely to take place in communities across the country. So in terms of the policing response, we're told that the police service across the country are going to be more robust. They are going to have more resources available to them, mutual aid, they call it, to be able to rapidly respond to forces should they require it. For instance, in Hartlepool, where the Chief Constable there indicated that they struggled with their resources for a time during the disorder that broke out in that particular location. But this disorder, Martin, quite frankly, could break out in any community anywhere in England and Wales. And if it does, in the first hours of any disorder breaking out, it will be difficult for the smaller forces in particular really to have a concerted effort to bring that under control in any timely manner.
Very much for joining us with an excellent and comprehensive update there, live from Downing Street. Thank you very much. For more analysis back in the studio on the political side, I'm now joined by our political editor, Chris Hope. Chris, let's just run through a few of the key lines from the speech in case people are joining us and they haven't tuned into Sir Keir Starmer earlier on. He said, a tiny, mindless minority of our society, a gang of thugs, got on trains and buses and threw bricks at the police. He then talks about mosques being targeted. He talks about Nazi salutes in London. He talks about division and fear being stoked up. He then said, I thought, which was an astonishing line, he said, this is not legitimate protest. We will put a stop to it. He then laid out how they will do that. And he said, these thugs are mobile. Far-right hatred is being spread. We'll have shared intelligence, including facial recognition, before they can even get on trains. He then intimated towards a clampdown on social media companies. This is happening on your premises, treating these people like football hooligans, but continually, Chris, seem to be focusing on what he perceived to be the biggest threat in Britain, the far right.
That's right. I mean, everyone would say that it's not legitimate to throw bricks and rocks at a mosque. It's not legitimate to throw bricks at the police and the like. We saw that in Southport. But the concern, I think, for many GB News viewers and listeners is there a two-tier level of policing here? Mark White, our Home Affairs and Security Editor, was in that press conference. He wasn't called by Number 10. That question wasn't asked by GB News on behalf of our viewers. The concern might be that he's just cracking down on people, not trying to understand what is behind this concern, this anger. Nothing justifies the violence we saw on the streets of Southport and elsewhere. But there's no attempt, it seems to be, by the government in what we heard there from Sir Keir Starmer to understand why people reacted that way. And
community engagement. We hear all the time about community engagement, for example, in Hare Hills. We need to listen to the community, we need to talk to them to understand their... There was none of that today. This was purely, we will stamp them down.
And the GB Views response email today is extraordinary to what was astonishing.
Yeah, it's been astonishing. People are saying, read out a few of those actually now, give you people, where the people shall give you a voice now. David says this, so according to Sir Keir Starmer, we are now all right-wing. This man has no idea just how angry the majority of people are in this country. We just want to be listened to. Colin says this, a crackdown on the far right, a crackdown on social media companies, only a month in charge for Sir Keir Starmer's Labour government. This, to me, doesn't sound like a democratic government. This sounds more like a dictatorship. And final point here to Jerry, one you made there a minute ago, Chris Hope. Of course, GB News didn't get a question because they might ask a question they didn't want to hear. This is ridiculous.
The point here is people do see different levels of policing around the country. Now, that can be for different reasons. We could see some forces can't cope with what might happen. But as Mark White there said eloquently, this can happen anywhere in the country. And just to say we're going to clamp down and stop it, not understand why people are cross, I think only answers half the question. And the problem the government's going to have is by seeming to go after one community and police them differently to a different one, that is a recipe for problems in the future.
Chris, has there been any political feedback on this yet? Any reaction out there?
So far, Lee Anderson, the Reform UK MP, one of 5 Reform UK MPs, former Tory MP, former Labour councillor, he says, Sir Keir Starmer, you're not reading the room. Richard Tice, the Deputy Leader, he says the elite political and media class are so terrified they're trying to silence, smear and label anyone who asks questions or are challenging the narrative. That's a problem. By not trying to address what may underlie the violence, which is not acceptable. We keep saying it on GB News, it's not acceptable, but we're not looking at the reason why it might be happening. He's storing up problems in the future, Sir Keir Starmer.
Yeah, and 2 of the questioners, very, very sympathetic questioning. I felt like they were handpicked to be very sympathetic. 2 of them were trying to pull Nigel Farage into this, into whipping.
Well, the questions were handpicked because GB News asked for questions in advance. We were told we wouldn't get one. We had a reporter, a very respected reporter, in the press conference, Mark White, a TV reporter for decades' experience, Home Affairs and Security. He wasn't called, maybe to ask the questions that they didn't want to hear.
And he was going to ask a question precisely about listening to communities, trying to understand the plight, their concerns. That simply didn't happen. An astonishing moment, an astonishing press conference today from Downing Street. Chris Hope, thank you for your analysis, as ever. Superb stuff. Now, moving on, the 17-year-old male charged with the murder of the 3 girls killed in Southport has been named as Alex Raducuna-Banner. And Alex Banner appeared at Liverpool Crown Court this morning. The teenager has also been charged with 10 counts of attempted murder and the possession of a bladed article. He has since been taken to a youth detention centre. Elsie Dot Stankham, Alice Aguiar and BB King died after a mass stabbing at a dance session on Hart Street on Monday. And joining us now, live from Liverpool Crown Court, is GB News' national reporter Charlie Peters. Charlie, the 17-year-old minor has been named. In the end, the public interest, public pressure, simply too great. Tell us more.
Well, Axel Ruder-Cabana attended 2 courts at this location behind me today. First, the youth court, where the charges were put before him, and then the Crown Court. But in both, he was totally silent. In fact, he arrived in the dock in both courts, in the first court, to smile towards the press gallery very briefly, and then sat in total silence with the grey tracksuit top covering his face. Occasionally, his eyes would dip above the hem of his grey tracksuit to look around the court, even just one eye, before then darting back under his jumper and staying in that position. In the Crown Court, he occasionally rocked side to side, but when the judge, Mr. Justice Mannery, discussed the possibility of lifting that anonymity order, he suddenly went still. And in the end, Mr. Justice Mannery was asked to decide between 2 competing legal ideas. Was it either in the defendant's interest for his welfare to not be named in public and wider concerns on that perspective? That was the view of the prosecution and the youth justice team. Or in the view of the press, did he need to be named just 17 at 6 days before he turns 18 due to this vacuum of information about the case, leading to wild speculation online, some of which the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, has touched on in the last hour. And in the end, the judge did side with the perspective that the anonymity order needed to be lifting. He said that idiots that had been rioting were feeding on online nonsense caused by silence and a lack of clear and honest understanding of the situation, and so in doing so lifted that anonymity order on the defendant, the man charged with these 3 counts of murder, 10 of attempted murder, and possession of a bladed article, which was described in the lower court as a kitchen knife that was curved. Axel Ruder-Cabana is set to appear at Liverpool Crown Court again on October the 25th. Until then, he will be remanded in youth custody in a secure unit.
From Liverpool Crown Court. And let's cross now to the USA. And Joe Biden gave a speech a little bit earlier.
Well, good afternoon. And this is a very good afternoon. A very good afternoon. Today we're bringing home Paul, Evan, Alsu, Vladimir.
Yeah.
3 American citizens and 1 American green card holder. All 4 have been imprisoned unjustly in Russia. Paul for nearly 6 years. Vladimir since 2022. Evan since March of 2023. And Alsu since October of 2023. Russian authorities arrested them, convicted them in show trials, and sentenced them to long prison terms with absolutely no legitimate reason whatsoever, none. Paul, a former Marine, was in Russia for a wedding. Evan, a journalist with a Russian, in Russia, was in Russia, assigned by the Wall Street Journal. Alsu, also a journalist, was in Russia to see family. All 3 falsely accused of being spies. And Vladimir was a Russian citizen by birth and holds an American green card. He's a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and was a pallbearer at my friend John McCain's funeral with me. He spoke out against Putin's regime, and for that he was convicted of treason. And now, their brutal ordeal is over, and they're free. Moments ago, the families and I were able to speak to them on the telephone from the Oval Office. They're out of Russia. Earlier today, they were flown to Turkey, and soon they'll be wheels up on their way home to see their families. This is an incredible relief for all the family members gathered here. It's a relief to the friends and colleagues all across the country who've been praying for this day for a long time. The deal that made this possible was a feat of diplomacy and friendship. Friendship. Multiple countries helped get this done. They joined the difficult, complex negotiations at my request, and I personally thank them all again. And I've thanked them personally, and I'll thank them again. All told, Russia has released 16 prisoners. 8 Russians who are being held in the West will be sent home as well. These 16 prisoners from Russia that Russia has released include 4 Americans, 5 Germans, 7 Russian citizens who are political prisoners in their own country. One of those Russians runs a human rights organization, Memorial, which won a Nobel Prize in 2022. Putin threw him in prison for voicing opposition to the war in Ukraine. 4 others worked with Alexei Navalny, political opposition leader who died in Russia prison this year. Now they can live safely abroad and continue their work of advocating for democracy if they so choose. This deal would not have been made possible without our allies. Germany, Poland, Slovenia, Norway, and Turkey, they all stepped up and they stood with us. They stood with us. And they made bold and brave decisions, released prisoners being held in their countries who were justifiably being held, and provided logistical support to get the Americans home. So for anyone who questions whether allies matter, they do. They matter. And today is a powerful example of why it's vital to have friends in this world. Friends you can trust, work with, and depend upon, especially on matters of great consequence and sensitivity like this. Our alliances make our people safer, and we began to see that again today. Let me say this. It says a lot about the United States that we work relentlessly to free Americans who are unjustly held around the world. It also says a lot about us that this deal includes the release of Russian political prisoners. They stood up for democracy and human rights. Their own leaders threw them in prison. The United States helped secure their release as well. That's who we are in the United States. We stand for freedom, for liberty, for justice, not only for our own people, but for others as well. And that's why all Americans can take pride in what we've achieved today. I want to thank everyone in my administration who helped make this happen. Our work did not start just on day one. It started before day one. During the transition, I instructed our national security team to dig into all the cases of hostages being wrongfully detained, which were inherently, well, we inherited them from the prior administration. I wanted to make sure we hit the ground running, and we did. As of today, my administration has brought home over 70 Americans who were wrongfully detained and held hostage abroad, many since before I took office. Additionally, I issued an executive order in 2022 authorizing penalties like sanctions and travel bans on those who hold Americans against their will. And my State Department has introduced new warnings for Americans about the risk of being wrongfully detained by a foreign government. Deals like this one come with tough calls, and there are never any guarantees. But there's nothing that matters more to me than protecting Americans at home and abroad. And so we'll continue to work for the release of all wrongfully detained Americans around the world. Let me end where I began, with Paul, Evan, and also Vladimir and their families. They never gave up hope. We can't imagine what they've been through, all of you. Matter of fact, this lady right here, I think, was living in the Oval Office with us for a while. All kidding aside, can't imagine their joy right now. They're home. Tomorrow's a big day, the 13th birthday of Miriam. Miriam, where are you? Come here. You all know we have a tradition in the Biden family. We sing happy birthday on any birthday. You ready? All of you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Miriam. Happy birthday to you. Remember, no serious guys till you're 30. God love you. She's Alsu's daughter. Now she gets to celebrate with her mom. That's what this is all about. Families able to be together again, like they should have been all along. So I want to thank you again to everyone who did their part. In just a few hours, we'll welcome home our fellow Americans. We're looking forward to that. God willing, we're going to be out at Andrews and get that done. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And this is a good day.
What did you say to them on the phone, sir? What did you say when they answered the phone on the other side?
I said, welcome almost home.
How do you keep countries, these so-called abductor states, from simply taking more Americans in order to get more of their prisoners home? How do you end these perverse incentives, sir?
Well, advising people not to go certain places. Tell them what's at risk, what's at stake.
There are these negotiations, and can you speak to the complexity of working with
6 countries to secure these releases?
Well, look, I'm not going to take the time now, but I'll do this later in the week. I particularly owe a great sense of gratitude to the Chancellor. The demands they were making of me required me to get some significant concessions from Germany, which they originally concluded they could not do because of the person in question. But everybody stepped up. Poland stepped up, Slovenia stepped up, Turkey stepped up. And it matters to have relationships. It really does. These things matter. Pardon me?
Could this improve relations with Russia? Is there any avenue for that after this prisoner exchange deal?
As my sister might say, your lips to God's ears, man.
Did you ever speak directly with Vladimir Putin about this, or would you be willing to speak with Putin now directly?
I don't need to speak with Putin. Anyway.
How did you weigh that decision of letting somebody out who sounds like got away with murder?
I got home innocent people. Thank you. All right.
Okay, that's Joe Biden there, giving his usually customary style press conference there, talking about the biggest exchange of prisoners with Russia since the Cold War. Worth pointing out, one of them, Vladimir Kara-Murza, is a dual Russian-British citizen becoming home soon. A deal brokered also in part by the United Kingdom. There's lots more still to come between now and 6 o'clock, including Andy Murray's latest dance. The Scottish superstar could be playing the final game of his career tonight, but has he got enough to reach an Olympic semi-final? But first is your headlines with Polly Middlehurst.
And the top stories this hour, the biggest prisoner swap since the Cold War. Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich has now left Russia less than 2 weeks after he was sentenced to 16 years on charges of espionage. He's been detained since last year on charges which he denies. Today's swap involved around 16 prisoners, including Vladimir Kara-Murza, who's a Russian-British citizen. In return, at least 8 Russian nationals expected to be returned to Russia, including several with suspected ties to Russian intelligence. And speaking a short time ago, President Biden thanking all the countries that helped that deal happen, particularly, of course, the United Kingdom. Well, here, Sir Keir Starmer says those who took part in riots across several cities in the UK this week weren't protesting. Instead, they're guilty of violent crimes. The scenes of violence came after Monday's stabbing attack in Southport, which resulted in the deaths of 3 little girls. After thanking the police, many of whom suffered serious injuries in the disorder, the Prime Minister announced a new police response unit aimed at cracking down on the disorder.
In the aftermath of this attack, the community of Southport had to suffer twice. A gang of thugs got on trains and buses, went to a community that is not their own, a community grieving the most horrific tragedy, and then proceeded to throw bricks at police officers who just 24 hours earlier had been having to deal with an attack on children in their community.
Meanwhile, a 17-year-old boy accused of carrying out that attack in Southport has been named today as Axel Rudakubana. He's been remanded in youth detention accommodation after appearing at Liverpool Crown Court this morning. 3 children, 7-year-old Elsie Dot Stancombe, Alice Aguirre, who is 9, and 6-year-old BB King were all killed during the attack at a school holiday club. Also in the news today, the BBC says it was told by police not to share details of Hugh Edwards' arrest for offences related to images of child abuse. It comes after it was revealed that the former news presenter was arrested in November but continued to be employed until April. And those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Polly Middlehurst. I'm back in half an hour with more. See you then.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thank you, Pauline. I've been absolutely blown away by the number of responses we've had to Sir Keir Starmer's speech earlier. Thousands of you have been getting in touch, and there's still time to have your say. gbnews.com/your say is the way to do it. I read out the best of your messages before the end of the show. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's News Channel.
Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update brought to you from the Met Office. Through this evening, thunderstorms will continue across parts of England. Hail and flooding is a risk with those thunderstorms. And across the northwest, it will turn a bit cloudier and wetter. That's because the weather front is arriving. It'll be a bigger feature as we head into tomorrow, bringing some wet and windy weather to the northwest. But through this evening, the potential for some further torrential downpours spreading into eastern areas of England. That could bring some travel disruption, but they will ease through the night. So for many of us, it will be a dry night, clear skies, but still a fairly muggy and humid one with temperatures in the mid to high teens for many areas. A little bit cooler further north, but certainly milder than it has been here lately. Now, as I said, through Friday, we've got wet and windy weather arriving into the northwest. So first thing on Friday across western areas of Scotland, the Highlands and Western Isles, probably some outbreaks of quite heavy rain. Further east to this, it will be a bright start across parts of Aberdeenshire, also across the Borders region as well, plenty of dry and bright weather. Further south as well, a fairly bright start to the day, particularly across Wales, central areas of England, the southwest as well. But in the southeast, there is a chance of some further heavy downpours through Friday morning. These bring a risk of further thunderstorms as well. Away from that, though, it should be another dry and bright day for many of us. Still feeling very warm in the sunshine across many areas of the UK. But across the north and west, where this wet and windy weather is spreading into parts of Northern Ireland and much of Scotland through Friday afternoon, it will turn a little bit fresher, temperatures dropping down into the teens away from the rest of the UK. Temperatures elsewhere still in the mid to high 20s and still feeling quite humid through Friday daytime. Into Friday evening, this band of rain will continue to push southeastwards through this evening to bring outbreaks of rain to many areas through Saturday, particularly in the southeast. That will clear away to the east for Sunday, but there's further rain arriving into the west later on. Bye-bye.
The latest GB News travel. Good afternoon, I'm Johnny Ratner. Major problems up in Greater Manchester on the M60 do continue. The clockwise carriageway currently blocked from junction 24 at Denton Island round to Stockport Pyramid, where a police investigation is underway. In Lincolnshire, just north of Grantham, the A1 northbound stays shut from Gonnerby Moor up to Long Bennington following a serious accident. Long queues coming the other way from Newark-on-Trent as well after the southbound carriageway was closed for quite some time earlier on. The M5 in Worcestershire is down to a single lane southbound from the Worcester exit down to the M50 following an accident. Really still on the Hertfordshire stretch of the M25 heading clockwise after a car overturned at Maple Cross. It's still queuing back to the M4. The M4 has a lane shut westbound between Maidenhead and Bracknell following an accident. And in Buckinghamshire, the Amersham Road shut north of High Wycombe train station for a police investigation. That's the latest. You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Welcome back. Your time is 5:38. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News. Well, joining me now is Michelle Dewberry, the queen of primetime political debate. Jubes, what's on your menu tonight? No doubt the reaction, thousands and thousands of people have got in touch with us about that astonishing speech earlier on from Sir Keir Starmer.
Exactly. I mean, I had a really well planned out, thought out show tonight. But of course, the words spoken by Sir Keir Starmer has changed it all, quite frankly. I'm telling you, like you just mentioned as well, Martin, I've never seen as much of a reaction. I can't remember getting as many messages as I've currently received. And I mean, he's only just finished speaking less than 2 hours ago. And I'm actually personally quite worried, Martin, because I don't want to see rioting on the streets. I don't want to see disconnection. I don't want anyone feeling frightened, whoever they are, whatever their skin colour and whatever community. But I just worry that the words from Sir Keir Starmer have not really done anything to dampen down the sentiments out there in society. I actually worry, and I really hope I'm wrong, I'd love to be wrong, I just worry that he's perhaps inflamed things.
You know, Michelle Dewberry, I absolutely think you've got your finger on the pulse, as ever. Quick a comment from one of my viewers. This is a pivotal moment for freedom of speech in Britain. So Keir Starmer today could have made a statement about the importance of addressing the concerns of the British people, or he could have doubled down and taken the country closer to a police state. In my opinion, he's done the latter. This is extremely concerning. Michelle, I think you're absolutely bang on the money here.
Well, look, I want to have a debate about it, so very much welcome anyone that's watching or listening at home to get in touch, tell me your thoughts, keep them clean, obviously, and I'll get through as many people's reactions as I possibly can before 7 o'clock.
Tubes and Co 6 till 7 is going to be a cracker. Thanks. Have a great show. Cheers. Now, moving on, could Andy Murray be playing his last ever match at the Paris Olympics? Well, Murray and Dan Evans are in the quarterfinals of the men's doubles with a real shot of a medal. But if they lose, the two-time gold medalist career will be over. And elsewhere, Team GB added to their medal tally this morning, picking up 3 more, taking their haul to 20. Magnificent so far. Now, for more on this, our daily Olympics update, we're joined now by sports broadcaster Chris Scudder. Scuds, fantastic day for Team GB. Let's start with a bit of Andy Murray. Is it going to be curtains or would he romp on?
It's a tough one tonight against the Americans. They're the third seeds. Taylor Fritz, who beat Jack Draper in the singles, and Tommy Paul. Now, this might help. Tommy Paul, about an hour and a half ago, was playing in the singles against Carlos Alcaraz, the Wimbledon champion. He played really well, but lost. He must be absolutely cream crackered. He's got to go back on the court now and play against Murray and Dan Evans, who will be pumped up as they have been. That photo says a million things, doesn't it? That they really want this. Andy Murray's won 2 golds before. He's won 3 Olympic medals, more than anybody else. And he doesn't want to retire. He does want to retire, but he doesn't want to go before he gets a medal. So it's going to be a cracking game. They should be starting fairly soon, actually. But it's a tough one. Now, listen, Fritz and Paul are both very good singles players as well. Doubles is different, but they seem to have a bit of togetherness as well. Let's hope they are absolutely exhausted, or at least Tommy Paul is, and then it would be great if Murray and Evans can get through tonight. They'd be through to the semi-finals, and then there'd be 1 game away. Or put it this way, there'd be 4 teams in the last 4, and 3 of them would get medals. So it's a massive game tonight, and we got everything crossed, I think.
And Chris Scudder, there's an astonishing story, a very emotional story in the women's boxing. An Italian boxer bowed out after just 46 seconds. A very controversial story behind it. Chris, tell us more.
Yeah, Iman Khalif from Algeria. Now, listen, this is very controversial because she was disqualified from the World Championships last year because of irregularities considered by them to be biologically male, has the XY chromosome, which gives the person an unfair advantage, high levels of testosterone. However, the World Championship people don't run Olympic boxing. The Olympics say it's fine. They've met all the eligibility criteria. So she is allowed to fight. She's not alone. Lin Yu Ting of Taiwan will be fighting on Friday as well. But it does say an awful lot. The Italian fighter Angela Carini today just pulled out of the fight. She was hit once and said, "I value my life," or words to that effect. Had to preserve my life, which are very strong words. Khalif had a lot of Algerian support in the crowd, but clearly this really does split opinions. Is it a fair fight? Some of her opponents say it's not, but it's clearly controversial and will remain so for the coming days, I think.
It's got to be said, Chris, seems to be incredibly unfair to train for all those years, only to step into the ring with the biological male, and she was crying on the canvas.
Gender specifics are kept confidential, so we don't know. Is it intersex? Was this person born a male? We don't really know. There's a lot of speculation on social media, etc., But the IOC, and they're the ones who make the rules up here, say that she has met the eligibility criteria, so will continue to fight. But clearly, her opponent today just said, "I'm not doing this. It's not a fair fight."
Huge talking point. Now let's have a bit more positivity. What about the British gold? Tell us the best.
Yeah, well, no golds today. It was a silver and 2 bronze. They've all come on the rowing leg. It's good to see that rowing. It had a poor Olympics in Tokyo by its very, very high standards with only 2 medals. It's now got 4. But it was well, you can see the pictures today. Well, I'll start with a happy story, because in the women's double scull, Matilda Hodgkins Byrne and Becky Wild they've only just been together a few months, and they were complete outsiders to get a medal. But they've done just that. They got a bronze today. A fantastic effort. I mean, trust me, that rowing is just such a brutal sport, and when you go through the training and the training camp, it's to get a medal. You know, it is the best thing they can do in their lives, really. So they got a bronze. They're very happy with that. However, there was a silver, and that didn't come with joy, really, but disappointment for Helen Glover, now 37, twice an Olympic champion, she was hoping to become the first British woman to win 3 Olympic golds, but they just couldn't quite do it. At the women's 4, they finished second behind the Dutch. You probably remember yesterday when the Britain quad sculls got a gold medal in their race when they beat the Dutch by 0.15 seconds. Well, today it was the other way around, sadly. So Helen Glover disappointed, but not for long. You know, it's still an Olympic silver medal, and that quartet will be, you know, while disappointed, will still be celebrating an Olympic medal tonight. And the other one came in the men's 4 as well. And again, a little bit disappointing. You'll probably remember the men's 4, they were unbeatable for so long. 5 Olympic Games in a row, gold medal every single time for the Britain men's 4 between 2000 and it would have been the 2016. 5 in a row. However, world champions didn't quite pull it off today. They got a bronze medal behind the US and New Zealand. But nonetheless, it's, you know, the rowers are doing really well. They've got a gold, a silver and 2 bronze. And I can pretty much tell you that on Friday in the lightweight women's double scull, Imogen Grant and Emily Craig are going to get a gold as well. Pretty sure of that. That's tomorrow.
Superb stuff, and a gold medal performance there from you, Chris Scudder. Thanks for joining us as ever. Superb stuff. Thank you. Now, is Prince Harry struggling to let go of his previous legal battles, according to his wife, Meghan? We'll tell you why the Duke of Sussex is struggling again in just a few moments' time. I'm Martin Daubney, and this is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Sunday with Michael Portillo from 11, only on GB News.
Karen Stevenson was born in Stoke-on-Trent and read music at Trinity College, Cambridge. She's played cello with many of the world's great orchestras under the batons of some of the most renowned conductors, and she joins me now to discuss her career and the importance of music in education. Tell me about that. What is your role at the Philharmonia?
My role at the Philharmonia is number 2 cello. I've been there for about 15 years. Sometimes I play number 1 cello as well, which is a great opportunity for me.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because I often think what a very difficult life it is to be a professional musician.
I make a living out of it. It is definitely possible. Yeah, we don't really like it when we get into a taxi and someone says, "What's your day job?" Because we work really hard.
I was kind of making the opposite point. Not that you'd also have a day job. I think the perfection that is required for a professional musician is extraordinary. On the whole, we are intolerant of mistakes in classical music.
Yes, we are.
And I just wondered whether you don't become very frustrated with a world in which everything else is imperfect.
You are only as good as your last concert, Michael. That's how it feels. It is a lot of pressure. Sometimes we will say, OK, a pint for every wrong note or something, but depending on the piece of music, that could be quite dangerous.
How many hours a day do you have to practice?
You have to practice much more when you're younger, I think, when you're learning. I think this is really important. And when you're at music college, I'm a busy, I'm travelling, I have a family. I can't practice as much as I used to, so you have to rely on your experience. What I really wanted to say is that there's been a lot of fear-mongering about classical music being in decline and it not being relevant. And I really wanted to say that I don't think that's the case. Our audiences have increased. They're the highest they've been in 10 years.
The People's Channel.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back, 5:50, the final furlong. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News. Now, Meghan Markle is back in the headlines once again as she wishes Prince Harry could let go of all these lawsuits and just live in the moment, whatever that means. And this comes as Prince Harry continues his appeal against the High Court decision about his security after losing several rounds of the case against the Home Office. And joining me now is the former royal correspondent at The Sun, the one-man legend, Charles Ray. Charles, always an absolute delight to have you on the show. Hold the front page. Meghan Markle has said something sensible.
Well, it appears to be sensible, and it comes from the Celebrity magazine that revealed about 2 years ago that her 5 friends spoke out on her behalf. So there appears to be some sort of truth. They've interviewed someone who used to work for Markle and Prince Harry, and they're saying that she wants Harry to put aside these various court cases. Now, I'm not sure whether she's talking about all the court cases or whether she's just talking about the one where he is pursuing this claim of his that he wants police protection when he and Meghan, if Meghan ever comes back to the UK again, and that'll be taxpayer funded.
And there's an astonishing other story here as well out today, Charles, about Harry and Charles's deepening rift. Insiders close to the prince claiming that the king no longer answers his calls. And again, this is all over this ongoing security battle.
Yeah, you're right, Martin. And it seems that Harry has got the mistaken belief, and he should know better than this. He's got the mistaken belief that the king can actually do something with the committee. That's the Royal and VIP Executive Committee. Now, they're the ones who decide who gets royal protection and who doesn't. And obviously, Harry falls in the second category. Now, the king is not a member of that committee, although there is a member of the household who does sit on the committee. But they don't have any power to say, yeah, he gets it. No, he doesn't get it. So I don't know why Harry seems to be just barking up wrong trees all the time. You'd have thought that given he saw his dad in February, that he'd be trying to concentrate more in bridging the rift. But he seems to be pushing it further and further away. It is astonishing the way he's carrying on.
Yeah, and there's no end to it in sight. But do you think there's any chance that Harry will drop these lawsuits? He seems addicted to them.
Well, no, I don't think there's any chance. I think it's now an obsession with him. He's got various lawsuits going on. He's got this one going on over his protection, and he's got 2 cases that are due up in the new year against the Sun and separately the Mail groups over the phone hacking scenario. And I'm not suggesting he should drop those. If he feels he's got a problem with that, then he should pursue it. But, I mean, clearly he's spending a lot of time talking to lawyers about various matters, and I think Meghan would think it would be better for Harry's mental health. He's always cracking on about his mental health if he were to sort of push back a little bit on these sort of things.
OK, Charles Ray, always a pleasure and never a chore. Thank you very much for joining us on GB News as ever. Now, that's all from me for today. Thank you. It's been a very emotional show. Jubes & Co. is up next. She's sure to continue that conversation about that astonishing press conference earlier on today from Sir Keir Starmer. But don't forget to join her from 6 a.m. tomorrow. It's Breakfast with Stephen and Anne, followed by Britain's Newsroom at 9:30. And then it's Good Afternoon Britain from midday. Now, I'm off on holiday this evening. I'll be back in the hot seat on Monday, August the 12th. It's my final show as well with my senior producer, Steve Baker. Steve, it's been emotional. Thank you for all of your help. I'm Austin Daubney, and this is GB News. Thanks for all your company. And now, let's enjoy your weather. And for that, it's Annie Shuttleworth. Have a fantastic evening. I'll see you on the 12th.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.